Hey guys, imagine this. You're huddled in a freezing cave, the wind howling like a banshee outside, and your only company is a flickering fire made from bones of beasts you barely managed to kill. One wrong move and you're lunch for a saber-toothed tiger or crushed under a mammoth's foot. That's not some fantasy. That's the daily grind for Europe's first modern humans, the so-called Cro-Magnons, who weren't even a species, just us, Homo sapiens, stumbling into a frozen hellscape 45,000 years ago. Think you're tough scrolling TikTok in your cozy bed? These folks invented survival the hard way with spears, art, and a whole lot of why me vibes. Buckle up because we're about to time travel to when Europe was a savage playground and humanity was just trying not to go extinct. Again, before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture this. It's around 45,000 BCE and the world is a brutal icebox. The last ice age is in full swing, glaciers creeping down from the north like uninvited guests who overstay their welcome. Europe? Forget the Eiffel Tower or Big Ben. It's a wild, untamed wilderness of dense forests, treacherous tundras, and rivers that could swallow you whole. And into this frozen apocalypse wander our ancestors, the first anatomically modern humans to set foot on the continent. We call them Cro-Magnons, named after a rock shelter in France where their bones were found in the 19th century. But here's the ironic twist. They weren't some exotic species. No, they were just us. Homo sapiens sapiens, the wise man, which is hilarious because if they were so wise, why'd they pick the coldest, most miserable place to crash? These folks migrated out of Africa, probably via the Middle East, dodging deserts and dodging death at every turn. Why Europe? Maybe they heard the mammoths were throwing epic parties, or perhaps it was sheer desperation. Populations exploding, resources dwindling back home. Whatever the reason, they crossed into a land already occupied by Neanderthals, those stocky cousins of ours who'd been toughing it out for hundreds of thousands of years. Ah, the Neanderthals, built like tanks, with brows that could shade a small village and brains as big as ours. They were the original Europeans, mastering fire, tools, and even burying their dead with a touch of ceremony. But our sapiens ancestors, they show up like uninvited relatives at a family reunion, bringing fancy new tech and a knack for outbreeding everyone. Let's get sarcastic here. Imagine being a Neanderthal, chilling in your cave, fashioning stone tools that could last a lifetime, and suddenly these tall, lanky newcomers arrive with their atlatls, those spear throwers that let them hurl death from a shrill distance. Oh great, you think, more mouths to feed, and they're probably going to steal our best hunting spots. The pain of survival? It's etched in every fossil we find. These early humans faced starvation, predation, and weather that makes a Siberian winter look like a spa day. Average lifespan, maybe 30 if you were lucky. Break a leg? You're done. Get an infection from a scratch? Sayonara. And yet, they persisted because quitting wasn't an option when the alternative was oblivion. Our story starts in the Aurignacian period, named after some French site because Europeans love naming everything after their backyard. Around 45,000 to 35,000 BCE, these pioneers are crafting blades sharper than a politician's tongue, bone tools that scream innovation, and even early art. Yeah, art. In the midst of dodging cave bears, they're carving ivory figurines and painting cave walls. Why? Because nothing says I'm surviving hell like doodling a horse on a rock. Take the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel, a 40,000-year-old ivory sculpture of a humanoid with a lion's head. Absurd, right? Here they are, freezing their butts off, and someone's whittling a mythical beast. Was it a shaman's toy, a religious icon, or just boredom therapy? Hey Gronk, the hunt's canceled due to blizzard. Want to sculpt a cat person? But let's not romanticize this. Survival was a nightmare. Hunting meant facing off against woolly mammoths, elephants on steroids with tusks like scythes. You'd need a team, perfect timing, and a prayer to whatever spirits you believed in. One misstep and you're trampled into paste. Gathering? Foraging for berries in thorn bushes while watching for wolves. And the cold. Oh, the cold. They'd huddle in skin tents or caves, sewing clothes from animal hides with bone needles. Imagine the smell. Unwashed bodies, rotting meat, smoke that stings your eyes. Pain, constant. Absurdity, trying to start a fire with flint when your fingers are numb, only to have it fizzle out because the wood's damp. Ironic, isn't it? We're the apex predators now, but back then we were just clever prey with dreams. Engage with me here, drop a comment. What's the craziest survival story you've heard from history? Was it these guys or something else? Let's chat about it. As they spread across Europe, from Spain to Russia, they encountered diverse landscapes. In the west, the Iberian Peninsula was a refuge, milder climates allowing for denser populations. Eastward, the Danube River became a highway for migration, leading to sites like Willendorf in Austria, where they left behind the famous Venus figurine, a plump woman carved from limestone, symbolizing fertility or perhaps just, hey, food's scarce, but curves are in. Sarcasm alert. In a world where starvation was your shadow, idolizing obesity, that's historical irony at its finest. These Venuses pop up everywhere. Were they goddesses, toys, or ancient porn? Scholars argue, but imagine the creator. Ugh, another lean winter. Let's make a statue of what we wish we looked like. The toolkit evolves absurdly fast, from simple flakes to pressure-flaked points that could pierce mammoth hide. They invented the bow and arrow eventually, but early on, it was all about the spear and the trap. Hunting parties would drive herds into pitfalls or off cliffs, efficient but risky. One wrong gust of wind, and you're the one tumbling. And the social dynamics, tribes of 20 to 50 people bound by blood and necessity, marriages arranged for alliances, kids learning to hunt before they could walk. Pain of loss was routine, infant mortality sky high, loved ones claimed by disease or accident, yet they buried their dead with grave goods. Tools, ochre, flowers, a touch of humanity in the horror. Let's zoom in on a day in the life. Dawn breaks over a misty valley in what's now France. You wake up stiff from sleeping on hides, the cave damp and echoing with snores. First task, check the fire. If it's out, you're screwed. Starting one from scratch takes hours of friction and frustration. Breakfast, leftover marrow from yesterday's kill, maybe some roots dug up by the women. Gender roles? Yeah, probably divided. Men hunting, women gathering, but everyone pitches in or everyone starves. Absurd, right? In our modern world of DoorDash, they forage for every calorie, head out to hunt, track a herd of reindeer across the tundra, wind biting your face like needles, your spears tipped with a blade you napped yourself, chip it wrong and it's useless. Spot the prey, heart pounding, you signal your kin. Ambush time. Throw, miss, and they bolt. Hit, and it's a frenzy of blood and butchery. Drag the carcass back miles, exhausted, only to find hyenas sniffing around camp. Fight them off, skin the beast, tan the hide, endless toil. Evening, share stories around the fire, maybe sing or dance to ward off the dark. But always, the fear. Will tomorrow bring famine, flood, foes, and foes there were. Neanderthals didn't vanish overnight. For thousands of years, Sapiens and Neanderthals coexisted, maybe traded, maybe fought, definitely interbred. Up to 2% of our DNA is Neanderthal, folks. Ironic twist, we wiped them out, but carry their ghost in our genes. Was it violence, disease, or just outcompeting them for resources? Picture the awkward encounters. Hey, short stuff, nice cave, mind if we move in? The pain of extinction. Neanderthals adapted to cold, but Sapiens had numbers, tech, and adaptability. By 40,000 BCE, Neanderthals are fading, their last holdouts in Gibraltar clinging like stubborn tenants. But our heroes aren't alone in absurdity. Enter Denisovans, mysterious cousins in Asia, but their DNA sneaks into some European lines too. Genetics is a wild party back then. In the environment, volcanic eruptions like the Campanian ignimbrite around 39,000 BCE blanket Europe in ash, killing off flora and fauna. Survival? Duck and cover, pray the sky's clear. Ironic. Nature's fireworks show, but it's apocalypse now. As the Aurignacian gives way to the Gravettian around 33,000 BCE, things get fancier. More art, more burials, more tools. The Gravettian folks are nomads supreme, following herds across vast plains. Sites like Dolní Věstonice in Czechia reveal fired clay figurines, world's oldest ceramics baked in kilns. Why fire clay animals when you could make pots? Artistic whimsy amid survival drudgery. And the burials, a triple grave with 2 men and a woman adorned with ochre and shells. Love triangle gone wrong, ritual sacrifice, history's soap opera buried in dirt, pain amps up with climate swings, Heinrich events, massive icebergs calving into the Atlantic, chilling Europe further, forests shrink, tundras expand, adapt or die, they do both, hunt smaller game, fish rivers with hooks, gather more plants. Social networks widen, trade amber from the Baltic, shells from the Mediterranean. Imagine the journeys, trekking hundreds of miles on foot through blizzards for a shiny rock. Absurd dedication to bling. Engage time. Comment below. What artifact from this era blows your mind? The Lion Man, Venus? Let's discuss why they bothered with art in hell. Diving deeper, let's talk cave art. Chauvet Cave, 36,000 BCE. Walls alive with lions, rhinos, horses, drawn with charcoal and ochre. Masterpieces in the dark, lit by torches that smoked up the place. Why deep underground? Rituals, hallucinations from fumes, sarcasm, nothing like carbon monoxide poisoning for inspiration. These artists risked life for legacy, painting in cramped spaces where one slip means a broken neck. The absurdity, we're decoding their symbols millennia later, arguing over meanings, while they probably just thought, cool drawing, bro, now let's eat. And the music, bone flutes from 40,000 BCE, tuned to pentatonic scales, jams around the campfire, perhaps to soothe the soul or scare predators. Ironic, prehistoric raves in a world without electricity. Flute from Isterit's cave, mammoth ivory, holes drilled precisely. Skill level? Expert. Pain of practice, blowing into bone till your lips bleed, all for a tune. As we hit 25,000 BCE, the last glacial maximum looms. Ice sheets at peak, sea levels drop, exposing land bridges. Europe shrinks, populations huddle in refugia, like southern France or Italy. Starvation stalks, but innovation blooms. Solutrian culture emerges in Iberia, with leaf-shaped points so thin they're like glass. Heat-treated for strength, early metallurgy vibes. Absurd. In freezing hell, they're basically inventing fine dining knives for mammoths. Burials get elaborate. Sungir in Russia. 2 kids interred with thousands of ivory beads, fox teeth, spears. Labor-intensive grave goods. Weeks of work for the dead. Why? Status? Afterlife prep? Pain of grief. Losing children in harsh times, yet honoring them lavishly. Ironic contrast to our disposable culture. Social life? Hierarchies forming? Shamans leading rituals, perhaps tripping on mushrooms for visions. Absurd. Hallucinogens in the Ice Age, nature's escape from reality. Wrapping this part, these first Europeans weren't conquerors, they were survivors in an absurdly hostile world. Pain defined them, irony mocked them, but they laid our foundation. Stay tuned for part 2, more migrations, art explosions, and the end of the Ice Age. Comment your thoughts. Would you survive back then? Hit like if you're hooked. Alright, let's dive back into the frozen, chaotic mess of prehistoric Europe, where our Cro-Magnon ancestors, aka us, Homo sapiens, with a side of existential dread, kept clawing their way through the Ice Age like the universe was personally out to get them. We're picking up around 25,000 BCE, deep in the Gravettian period, where survival is still a daily middle finger to nature's worst impulses. The last glacial maximum is breathing down their necks, turning Europe into a popsicle with extra misery. Think you've had a rough day because your Wi-Fi dropped? These folks were out here dodging avalanches, starvation, and cave lions, all while inventing culture like it was their side hustle. Let's unpack the absurdity, pain, and sheer audacity of their existence with a smirk and a shudder. We're in the thick of the Ice Age now, and the climate is a sadistic prankster. The last glacial maximum, peaking around 26,500 to 19,000 BCE, is the coldest Europe's been in forever. Glaciers stretch so far south you could ice skate from Denmark to the Mediterranean, if you weren't busy running from wolves or scraping frostbite off your toes. The landscape's a patchwork of tundra, steppe, and patches of forest clinging to life like a stubborn weed. Mammoths, reindeer, and giant elk roam in herds, which sounds majestic until you realize you're hunting them with sticks and a prayer. Our sapiens are nomads, following these beasts across plains so vast you'd get lost just looking at the horizon. Ironic, isn't it? They're chasing dinner, but one wrong move and they're the main course. The Gravettian culture is the star of this era, and these folks are extra. They're not just surviving, they're flexing with art, burials, and tech that scream, "We're here and we're fabulous." Take their tools, pressure-flaked points so sharp they could shave a mammoth's hide cleaner than a modern razor. They've got bone needles for sewing tailored parkas from reindeer hide, because nothing says haute couture like not freezing to death. But the real absurdity? They're spending hours carving tiny figurines and weaving beads while the wind outside howls like it's auditioning for a horror flick. Imagine the scene. "Hey, ugh, another blizzard's coming, but hold up. I need to finish this ivory pendant. Priorities, right?" Let's zoom in on their daily grind, because it's a masterclass in pain. Wake up in a skin tent or a cave so damp your bones ache. Fire's your lifeline, but keeping it going is a full-time job. Gather wood in sub-zero temps, flint nap a spark, and pray it catches before your fingers turn black. Food? If you're lucky, it's roasted horse from yesterday's hunt, maybe some bitter roots or berries that taste like regret. Hunting's no picnic either. Picture stalking a herd of aurochs, cows on steroids with horns that could skewer a tank. You've got an atlatl, maybe a bow, but miss your shot and the herd bolts, leaving you hungry for days. Success means dragging a 500-pound carcass back to camp through snow, only to fight off scavengers like hyenas who don't respect your hustle. The social vibe? Tight-knit tribes, maybe 30 to 50 people, where everyone's related or at least acts like it. You're born, you learn to hunt or gather, you reproduce, you die, usually young. Infant mortality's a gut punch. Half the kids don't make it past 5. Women are out gathering, crafting, and keeping the camp running, while men lead the hunts. But don't kid yourself. Everyone's pitching in, or it's game over. Marriage? More like strategic alliances to keep tribes from imploding. Absurdity alert. You're betrothed at 12, expected to pop out babies in a world where a cold can kill you. Pain? Losing your kid to fever, your brother to a cave bear, and still having to get up and hunt tomorrow. But here's where it gets wild. They're not just surviving, they're creating. Cave art explodes in this period. Lascaux Cave in France around 17,000 BCE is like the prehistoric Louvre. Walls covered in horses, bison, and deer, painted with such skill you'd think they had art school. These masterpieces are deep in caves, lit by flickering torches that probably gave everyone headaches. Why paint in the dark? Religious rituals? Trippy visions from eating weird mushrooms? Or just because they could? Sarcasm time. Nothing screams, "I'm thriving," like risking your life to draw a bull in a cave, where one wrong step means you're stuck forever. Chauvet, Altamira, you name it. These caves are galleries of grit, proof they had souls bigger than their circumstances. Engage with me. Drop a comment. What's the wildest cave art you've heard of, and what do you think it meant to them? Let's get some theories going. Burials are another obsession. At Dolny Vistanets in what's now Czechia, they're burying people with style. One grave has a woman flanked by 2 men, all covered in red ochre with beads and tools. Drama alert. Was this a love triangle, a sacrifice, or just VIPs getting the deluxe afterlife package? The effort's absurd. Thousands of hours grinding beads, carving ivory, all for the dead. Ironic. You're starving, but you're stitching a necklace for someone who's not eating anymore. Sungir in Russia takes it up a notch. 2 kids buried with 10,000 ivory beads, spears, and animal teeth. That's months of labor. Pain of loss meets the absurdity of excess. Grief so intense they're dressing up corpses like runway models. Tech keeps evolving, because these folks don't quit. Solitarian culture pops up in Iberia and France around 22,000 to 17,000 BCE, and their tools are next level. Laurel leaf points so thin they're practically transparent, heat-treated for durability. It's like they're forging swords for giants, but with flint. They're also fishing more, using nets and hooks, because why wrestle a mammoth when you can snag a salmon? Trade networks expand too. Shells from the Mediterranean show up in Germany. Obsidian from Italy travels north. Imagine trekking 500 miles through blizzards for a shiny rock. Absurd dedication to bling, but it's also survival. Alliances mean shared resources when the next famine hits. Climate's still a jerk. Heinrich events, icebergs dumping into the Atlantic, keep Europe in a deep freeze. Forests vanish, forcing tribes to adapt or starve. They hunt smaller game, gather more plants, even eat snails when times are tough. Ironic, we're the top species now, but back then, they're munching mollusks like it's fine dining. And the predators? Cave lions, bears, wolves. Every step outside camp is a gamble. One fossil shows a human skull with bite marks. Yeah, sometimes the food chain flipped. Pain of survival. Knowing you're not always the hunter. Socially, things are getting spicy. Evidence of conflict emerges. Skeletons with arrow wounds, skulls bashed in. Were tribes fighting over hunting grounds, women, or just because someone looked at someone else's mammoth steak funny? Ironic, they're painting masterpieces and singing around fires, but also clubbing each other over resources. And let's talk shamanism. Some burials suggest spiritual leaders, folks with weird hats or drug-induced visions leading rituals. Absurd, in a world where a broken ankle means death, they're tripping on plants to talk to spirits. Pain, when the spirits don't answer and the herd doesn't show. Music's still a thing. Flutes from Hola Fells, carved from vulture bones, hit pentatonic notes like a prehistoric jazz band. Imagine the scene, firelight, a haunting melody, and everyone swaying, forgetting the cold for a moment. But the effort? Drilling bone with flint tools, testing notes while your stomach growls, pure dedication. Sarcasm. Nothing says party like a flute solo in a cave that smells like death. As the glacial maximum starts to thaw around 19,000 BCE, the Magdalenian culture takes over, and these folks are the rock stars of the Ice Age. They're hunting with harpoons, crafting lamps from stone to light their caves, and painting like their lives depend on it. Altamira's ceiling, with its vivid bison, is so stunning it was called fake when discovered. Ironic, modern humans doubted their ancestors' genius because it was too good. Pain, creating art in freezing, smoky caves, knowing most won't survive to see it. They're also domesticating dogs. Yes, dogs. Wolf pups raised in camps, helping hunt, guard, or just cuddle for warmth. Absurd. In a world of constant danger, they're making time to train Fido. In clothing, they're sewing tailored outfits with bone needles, decorating them with beads. Fashion in the Ice Age. Because why not look good while you're starving? Engage again. Comment. What's the most absurd thing you think they did to survive or flex their culture? Beads, art, dogs. Hit me with your thoughts. As we edge toward 15,000 BCE, the ice retreats and Europe starts to look less like Narnia's eternal winter. Forests creep back, animals shift, and our sapiens adapt like champs. They're fishing, trapping birds, even experimenting with early agriculture in some spots. But don't get comfy. The younger Dryas, a sudden cold snap around 12,900 BCE, is looming, ready to slap them back to square one. Pain. Just when you think you've got it figured out, nature pulls the rug. Absurdity. They keep going, inventing, loving, fighting, creating. This part's done, but the saga's far from over. Part 3's coming with more climate chaos, epic hunts, and the dawn of something resembling civilization, if you can call it that. Drop a comment. Could you handle their life? Hit like if you're still hooked, and stay tuned for the next chapter of this prehistoric circus. Alright, we're back in the prehistoric deep end, splashing through the tail end of the Ice Age where our Cro-Magnon ancestors, yep, still just us, Homo sapiens, with a knack for dodging disaster, are clinging to survival like it's a full-time job with no benefits. It's roughly 15,000 BCE, and the last glacial maximum is finally loosening its icy grip, but don't pop the champagne yet. Europe's still a wild, unpredictable beast of a continent, with thawing glaciers, shifting herds, and a climate that flips faster than a reality TV plot twist. The Magdalenian culture's in full swing, and these folks are basically the rock stars of the Paleolithic, juggling epic hunts, jaw-dropping art, and the constant threat of becoming a cave bear's snack. Let's dive into the irony, pain, and absurd hustle of their world, with enough sarcasm to keep you smirking through the misery. The ice is retreating, and Europe's starting to look less like a frozen wasteland, and more like a soggy, muddy one. Forests are creeping back, pines and birches staking claim where tundra once ruled. Rivers swell with meltwater, turning valleys into swamps that'd swallow your boots, if you had any. Animals are shifting too. Mammoths and woolly rhinos are getting scarcer, pushed north or into extinction's waiting room, while reindeer, red deer, and wild boar take center stage. Sounds like a buffet, right? Except hunting these beasts means wrestling with nature's worst moods. Floods, predators, and the occasional avalanche for spice. Ironic, the world's warming up, but survival's still a cold, hard slap in the face. The Magdalenian folks are the MVPs of this era, roughly 17,000 to 12,000 BCE, and they're not just surviving, they're thriving in that we might die tomorrow, so let's make it epic kind of way. Their tools? Absolute works of art. Harpoons with barbs carved from antler or bone for spearing fish or small game. Atlatls with engraved designs, because why not make your spear thrower look sexy? They're also crafting stone lamps, hollowed out to hold animal fat in a wick, lighting up their caves like prehistoric mood lighting. Absurdity check. You're starving, freezing, and still taking time to carve intricate patterns on a tool you'll lose in a week. Pain? Try rendering fat in a smoky cave, knowing one spark could burn your only shelter down. Daily life's a grind that'd make your gym routine look like a nap. Wake up in a tent made of hides, the wind rattling the seams like it's trying to break in. Fire's your best friend, but it's high maintenance. Gather wood, strike flint, and pray it doesn't rain. Breakfast might be smoked fish or leftover deer. Maybe some hazelnuts if the women's foraging paid off. Gender roles are still a thing. Men hunt, women gather, but everyone's hauling ass to keep the tribe alive. Kids are out learning to track game before they can tie their own. Well, they don't have shoes, so let's say before they can nap flint. Ironic, we're binge-watching Netflix while they're binge-surviving, with no off button. Hunting's a high-stakes poker game. Track a herd of red deer across a muddy plain, your breath visible in the dawn chill. Your spear's tipped with a microlith, tiny razor-sharp stone blades glued into bone or wood with resin. Miss your shot and the herd's gone, leaving you to face your tribe's disappointed stares. Hit it and you're a hero, until you have to butcher the thing, carry it miles, and fend off wolves sniffing for a free meal. Sarcasm alert. Nothing says team bonding like wrestling a 200-pound carcass through a swamp while hyenas laugh in the distance. Pain? Sprain an ankle and you're dead weight. Get gored by a boar and there's no ER, just your buddies hoping you don't bleed out. Engage with me. Drop a comment. What's the toughest survival skill you think you could master from this era? Hunting? Fire making? Or would you just hide in the cave? Let's hear it. Art's still their obsession, because apparently they've got time between near-death experiences. Cave walls are their canvas, Altamira, Lascaux, Nio, covered in bison, horses, and handprints that scream, "We were here." Painted with ochre, charcoal, and spit, these murals glow under flickering lamps. Why deep in caves? Spiritual quests? Initiation rites? Or just showing off? Absurd. Risking your life crawling through pitch-black tunnels to paint a deer that no one's gonna see for millennia. Ironic. We're decoding their art in climate-controlled museums while they were dodging stalactites to create it. Pain. Mixing pigments in freezing caves, your fingers numb, knowing the next hunt might be your last. And the portable art? They're carving antlers, bones, even mammoth ivory into figurines of animals, women, or weird abstract shapes. The Venus of Brasempouy, a tiny ivory head from France, is so delicate it's like they had microscopes. Sarcasm. Sure, let's spend 40 hours carving a face smaller than a walnut while the kids are eating bark. Burials keep getting wilder too. At La Madeleine, a child's grave is decked with shells and ochre, grief wrapped in beauty. Pain of loss, pouring your heart into decorating a tiny coffin for a kid who didn't make it past 3. Ironic, they're immortalizing the dead while fighting to stay alive. Tech's evolving faster than a viral meme. They're using bow and arrow now, a game changer for hunting from a distance. Nets for catching birds, fish, traps woven from willow. Because why chase dinner when you can trap it? They're also domesticating dogs, taming wolf pups to help hunt or guard camp. Absurd. You're barely feeding yourself, but you're sharing scraps with a furry sidekick. Ironic, dogs are man's best friend, but back then, they're also man's best bodyguard. Evidence from sites like Bonn Oberkassel shows a dog buried with humans, complete with grave goods. Pain, loving a pup in a world where everything's trying to kill you. Socially, it's a soap opera. Tribes are growing, maybe 100 people in bigger camps, connected by trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. Baltic amber in Spain, Mediterranean shells in Germany. Someone's walking far for that bling. Conflicts brewing too. Skeletons show up with arrowheads lodged in ribs, skulls cracked like walnuts. Was it rival tribes, raiders, or just a bad day at the mammoth hunt? Sarcasm. Nothing builds community like a good old-fashioned spear to the chest. Pain. Watching your kin die over a hunting ground dispute, knowing you'll face the same risk tomorrow. Climate's still a roller coaster. Around 12,900 BCE, the Younger Dryas hits. A sudden cold snap that's like nature saying, "You thought you were done with me?" Glaciers creep back, forests shrink, and game gets scarce. Adapt or die again. They shift to smaller game, rabbits, birds, because mammoths are basically ghosts now. Fishing ramps up with bone harpoons and nets pulling in salmon and trout. They're even experimenting with plants, grinding seeds into flour. Ironic, the first steps toward agriculture while they're still nomads chasing deer. Absurd, grinding grains with rocks when you could be napping by the fire. Music keeps their spirits up. Flutes from swan bones or mammoth ivory, played in caves or under starry skies. Imagine the haunting notes echoing through a valley, a moment of beauty in a brutal world. Sarcasm. Why hunt when you can jam out on a bone flute and hope the animals dance to their doom? Pain. Crafting an instrument with flint tools, your hands bleeding, just to play a tune for your freezing tribe. As we hit 12,000 BCE, the Mesolithic period looms, and things are shifting fast. The ice is melting for good, sea levels rising, flooding coastal camps. Doggerland, the land bridge between Britain and Europe, is drowning, forcing tribes to move or adapt. They're fishing more, building canoes from hollowed logs. Early boats, because swimming across a swollen river is a death wish. Absurd, carving a canoe with stone tools while the tide's creeping in. Pain, watching your home vanish underwater, knowing you've got to start over. Art's getting portable, engraved pebbles, antler batons, less cave painting as they spend more time on the move. They're also building semi-permanent camps with hearths and storage pits. Ironic, settling down in a world that won't stop changing. Pain, building a home just for a flood to wash it away. Socially, hierarchies might be forming, shamans or chiefs leading bigger groups. Evidence of feasting sites like Starcar in England shows deer skulls worn as headdresses, maybe for rituals. Sarcasm. Nothing says party like wearing a dead deer's face while eating its cousin. Engage time. Comment. What's the most mind-blowing thing about this era to you? The art? The dogs? The sheer grit? And would you survive their world? Hit like if you're still with me. We're setting the stage for the final act around 10,000 BCE, when the Ice Age finally bows out, and the Neolithic's knocking. Climate's warming, animals are plentiful, and our sapiens are on the cusp of something big. Farming, villages, a whole new kind of crazy. But that's for part 4. Stay tuned for the grand finale of this prehistoric circus, where survival meets absurdity in a world that's finally thawing. Drop a comment. What's your bet? Could they have predicted what's coming? Hit like and brace for the end. Here we are, folks, at the grand finale of our prehistoric roller coaster, where our Cro-Magnon ancestors, still just us, Homo sapiens, with a PhD in not dying, are teetering on the edge of the Ice Age's curtain call. It's around 10,000 BCE, and the world's finally thawing, but don't expect a tropical paradise. Europe's a soggy, shifting mess of rising seas, vanishing land bridges, and animals that are either going extinct or getting harder to chase. The Mesolithic period is in full swing, and these folks are adapting faster than a chameleon in a paint factory. They're fishing, foraging, and flirting with the idea of settling down, all while the universe throws curveballs like floods and famines. Let's wrap this saga with the same mix of irony, pain, and absurd survival hustle that's carried us through, served with a side of sarcasm to keep you glued to the screen. The Younger Dryas, that rude cold snap from 12,900 to 11,700 BCE, is finally fading, and Europe's warming up like a microwave dinner. Forests are exploding, oak, hazel and elm turning the tundra into a green maze. Rivers are swollen, coasts are flooding, and Doggerland, that handy land bridge between Britain and Europe, is now a soggy memory under the North Sea. Imagine packing up your camp because the sea's literally knocking. Ironic, you've survived ice sheets and saber-toothed cats only to get evicted by rising tides. Pain, watching your home drown, knowing you've got to haul your life's possessions, aka a few spears and some beads, somewhere new. The Mesolithic folks are lean, mean, adapting machines. Mammoths are gone, woolly rhinos are history, but red deer, wild boar, and fish are everywhere. Hunting's still a gamble. Track a deer through dense woods, your bowstring snapping because it got wet, and you're back to eating berries that taste like dirt. Fishing's the new hotness, though. They're crafting nets, traps, and barbed bone harpoons to snag salmon and trout from rivers. Canoes carved from logs with stone axes let them paddle across lakes or coastal waters. Absurd, spending weeks hacking a tree into a boat when one leak means you're swimming with the fish. Sarcasm, nothing screams vacation like paddling a rickety canoe through a storm to catch dinner. Daily life's still a brutal to-do list. Wake up in a semi-permanent camp. Think hides stretched over wooden frames, maybe a stone hearth if you're fancy. Fire's your lifeline, but gathering wood in a wet forest is like collecting sog personally insulted you. Food, fish, nuts, roots, maybe a roasted hare if the hunt went well. Women and kids are out foraging, hazelnuts, wild apples, anything edible, while men stalk game or set traps. But don't kid yourself, everyone's doing everything because slacking means starvation. Kids learn to fish or nap flint by age 6. Ironic, we're stressing over Wi-Fi passwords while they're teaching toddlers to gut fish. Pain, watching your kid cry from hunger, knowing the forest might not deliver today. Tools are getting slicker. Microliths, tiny stone blades, turn sticks into deadly arrows or sickles for cutting plants. They're gluing these bad boys with resin, making weapons so efficient you'd think they had an R&D department. Dogs are now full-on squad members, helping hunt, guard, or just keep you warm. Evidence from Starcar in England shows dog teeth in burials, suggesting Fido's got VIP status. Absurd. You're barely feeding yourself, but you're tossing scraps to a wolf descendant who's better at your job. Sarcasm. Man's best friend? More like man's best employee. Engage with me. Drop a comment. What's the most insane Mesolithic skill you wish you had? Fishing with a bone harpoon? Building a canoe with rocks? Let's see who's ready for the Stone Age. Art's shifting as camps move. Cave paintings taking a back seat. Too hard to lug ochre when you're nomadic. Instead, they're carving pebbles, antlers, and bones with geometric patterns or animal shapes. Portable art, because who's got time to crawl into a cave? Starcar's deer antler headdresses, probably worn for rituals, scream, we're extra even when we're starving. Ironic, they're crafting jewelry while dodging floods like prehistoric influencers flexing for the gram. Pain, hours carving a pendant, knowing a storm could wash it away tomorrow. Burials are still a big deal, but simpler. At Vedbæk in Denmark, a woman and infant are buried with flint tools and red ochre. Grief etched in every carefully placed stone. Pain, losing a child and still taking hours to honor them, knowing you'll face the same risk with the next. Absurd, decorating graves when you're not sure where your next meal's coming from. Socially, tribes are tighter, maybe 50 to 100 people, with trade networks stretching farther. Shells from the coast show up inland, flint from Poland travels west. Someone's hiking hundreds of miles for a shiny rock, because apparently, bling's worth it. Conflict's a constant. Skeletons from Ovnet Cave in Germany show decapitated heads arranged in a pit. War trophies or ritual weirdness? Arrow wounds and bashed skulls pop up elsewhere. Sarcasm. Nothing says neighborly like a flint arrow in your buddy's spine. Pain. Fighting over a fishing spot when you're all just trying to eat. Shamans or leaders might be emerging. Those headdresses and fancy burials hint at someone calling the shots. Absurd. Following a guy in a deer mask who claims he talks to spirits, especially when the spirits keep sending floods. Climate's warming, but it's not all sunshine. Sudden storms, unpredictable rains. Nature's still a jerk. They're experimenting with plants more, grinding seeds into flour with stone querns. Early agriculture? Kinda. They're not farmers yet, but they're noticing which plants grow back. Ironic, the seeds of civilization are sprouting while they're still chasing boars through the woods. Food storage is new too, pits lined with stones to keep nuts or dried fish. Absurd, digging a pantry with a stick when you might have to abandon it next week. As we hit 9000 BCE, the Neolithic's knocking. In the Near East, farming's already a thing, wheat, barley, goats, but Europe's a bit slower. Mesolithic folks are flirting with domestication, managing forests to boost hazelnut yields or herding wild pigs. Starcar shows evidence of controlled burns to clear land for game or plants. Sarcasm, why hunt when you can set the forest on fire and hope dinner shows up? Pain, burning your home by accident because stone tools aren't exactly precision tech. Settlement's the big shift. Camps like Lepenski Vir in Serbia have stone-lined houses, fish sculptures, and hearths, semi-permanent vibes. They're not villages yet, but they're close. Ironic, building a home when the sea's creeping closer every year. Pain, investing in a camp, only for a flood to turn it into a lake. Socially, hierarchies are forming. Some burials have more bling, beads, tools, suggesting chiefs or shamans are flexing status. Absurd, showing off wealth when your wealth is a pile of shells and a sharp rock. Music's still alive, bone flutes and whistles, maybe drums from stretched hides. Imagine a campfire jam, the rhythm keeping the dark at bay. Sarcasm, nothing drowns out the sound of wolves like a good bone flute solo. Pain, crafting an instrument when your hands are calloused from hauling nets. Rituals are big, those fish sculptures at Lepenski Vir might be gods or totems. Absurd, worshipping a stonefish when real fish are swimming away. By 8000 BCE, the Neolithic's crashing the party. Farming spreads from the Near East, hitting Greece and the Balkans first. Early farmers bring wheat, lentils, and sheep, building mud brick houses and planting fields. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers either adapt or get pushed out. Ironic, after surviving the Ice Age, they're sidelined by guys with seeds and a plow. Pain, watching your way of life vanish as farmers fence off your hunting grounds. Some resist, sticking to fishing and foraging, but the tide's turning. Engage one last time. Comment, what's the most epic part of this prehistoric saga to you? The art? The survival? The dawn of farming? And could you hack it in their world? Hit like if you've loved this ride. This is it, the end of our Cro-Magnon chronicle. From freezing caves to flooded coasts, these folks built the foundation for everything we are, with nothing but grit, flint, and a stubborn refusal to quit. They painted, loved, fought, and died in a world that tried to break them, leaving us their bones, art, and a legacy of absurd resilience. Ironic, we're here because they didn't give up even when life was a cosmic joke. Pain, every step was a gamble, every loss a scar. So, raise a glass or a bone flute to our ancestors who turned a savage world into our starting line. Drop a comment. What's next? More ancient history or something else? Hit like, and let's keep exploring the wild past together. Hey guys, picture this. You're not some brutish caveman clubbing dinner and grunting at shadows. No, you're a sophisticated artist, a master toolmaker, even burying your dead with flowers. But the world calls you a dumb thug anyway. That's the Neanderthal life. Our ancient cousins who weren't the dim-witted losers history painted them as, but clever survivors in a frozen hell, outsmarting ice ages until we Homo sapiens crashed the party and, well, outlasted them. Think you're evolved? These folks had bigger brains than us, as yet they're extinct. Dive in for the ironic tragedy of it all. Let's kick this off with a bang, or should I say, a fossilized thud. Neanderthals, those stocky, brow-ridged relatives of ours, have been the butt of every evolutionary joke since their bones were dug up in 1856 in Germany's Neander Valley. Neanderthal literally means man from the Neander Valley, which is about as glamorous as being named after a ditch. But here's the absurdity. These weren't cavemen in the cartoon sense, dragging clubs and women by the hair. No, they were Homo neanderthalensis, our closest extinct kin, thriving across Europe and parts of Asia for over 300,000 years, from around 400,000 BCE to about 40,000 BCE. They faced ice ages that make your winter commute look like a beach day, and they did it with brains bigger than ours, up to 1,600 cubic centimeters, versus our puny 1,350. Ironic, right? Bigger brains, yet we're the ones with smartphones and their dust. The pain of survival? Etched in every cracked bone we find, a testament to a life where one bad hunt meant starvation, and the cold was a killer that never slept. Flash back to their origins. Neanderthals evolved from Homo heidelbergensis in Europe, adapting to the brutal cold as the planet yo-yoed between glacial periods. Imagine the scene. Around 400,000 BCE, the world's an icebox, with glaciers swallowing landscapes like a bad breakup. Forests shrink, tundras expand, and our proto-Neanderthals are hunkered down in what's now France or Germany, chipping stones into tools while the wind howls like it's personally offended. Their bodies, built like tanks, short, muscular, with barrel chests for conserving heat, wide noses for warming frigid air, and those famous brow ridges that could shade a picnic. Absurd evolution. Nature's way of saying, here, have a forehead like a cliff so you look intimidating, but good luck fitting into modern hats. Pain? Constant. Arthritis in fossils shows they were battered by life. Joints grinding like overworked gears from hauling carcasses and dodging predators. Early Neanderthal life was a nightmare of necessity. They're hunter-gatherers supreme, but gathering meant scraping lichen off rocks in blizzards and hunting, facing off against woolly mammoths or cave bears with spears that look like toothpicks. Sites like Schöningen in Germany reveal 300,000-year-old wooden spears, 8 feet long, balanced for throwing. Sarcasm alert, because nothing says fun afternoon like hurling a stick at a 10-ton beast that could stomp you into paste. They'd ambush herds, drive them into traps or off cliffs, efficient, but one slip and you're the cliff's newest decoration. The irony, we romanticize their strength, but every hunt was a dice roll with death. Fossils show broken bones healed wrong, scars from infections that today a band-aid would fix. Survival? A daily grind where tough day at the office meant limping home with a gash from a rhino's horn. But let's not paint them as brutes. They had culture, folks. By 200,000 BCE, they're using fire like pros, not just for warmth, but for cooking, which softens food and kills parasites. Imagine the absurdity. In a cave reeking of smoke and unwashed hides, they're roasting horse meat over flames. They started by striking pyrite on flint, sparks flying like prehistoric fireworks. Pain? Inhaling that smoke day in, day out, lungs blackening while the fire's your only barrier against wolves circling outside. They're crafting Mousterian tools, flakes sharpened into scrapers, points, and awls for sewing hides into clothes. Ironic, tailored outfits from mammoth skin, because off the rack wasn't an option in the Ice Age mall. Social life? Tribes of 10 to 30, bound by blood and brute necessity. Families huddled in caves or rock shelters, sharing warmth like sardines in a can. Kids learned young, toss a spear or die trying. Gender roles? Men probably led hunts. Women gathered and crafted, but everyone pitched in or the tribe starved. Marriages? Arranged for alliances, because love's great, but surviving winter's better. Absurd. Wooing with a necklace of bare teeth, whispering sweet nothings like, I killed this for you, now help me skin it. Pain of loss was routine. High infant mortality, with tiny skeletons buried alongside adults. They cared, though. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal buried with flowers. Pollen evidence suggests a funeral rite. Sarcasm. Nothing softens extinction like a bouquet in your grave. Engage with me here. Drop a comment. What's the most misunderstood thing about Neanderthals you've heard? Cavemen myths or something else? Let's debunk in the comments. As the Middle Paleolithic rolls on, around 300,000 to 40,000 BCE, Neanderthals spread from Spain to Siberia, adapting to everything from Mediterranean coasts to Siberian steppes. In warmer interglacials, they hunt in forests. In glacials, they tough it out on tundras. Take La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, a 50,000-year-old skeleton of an old man with arthritis, missing teeth, cared for by his tribe. Ironic. In a world where weakness means death, they're nursing the elderly, proving compassion predates us Sapiens snobs. Pain? He lived long enough to suffer. Gums aching from chewing softened food his kin prepared. Absurdity. We call them primitive, but they had elder care without Medicare. Diet? Carnivores mostly. 90% meat from reindeer, bison, horses. They'd butcher with precision, using every bit. Meat for food, bones for tools, hides for shelter. At sites like Spy Cave in Belgium, cut marks show they defleshed bones meticulously. Sarcasm. Veganism? Not an option when plants are buried under snow. But they ate veggies too. Starch residues on teeth reveal cooked plants, maybe roasted tubers. Pain. Foraging in thorns, risking poison berries because hunger's the bigger killer. And cannibalism. Yeah, some sites like Krapina in Croatia show cut marks on bones. Desperation or ritual? Ironic. Eating your kin to survive, the ultimate family dinner gone wrong. Tech evolves absurdly. Levallois technique, preparing a core to flake off perfect blades, tools for every task, scrapers for hides, denticulates for sawing wood. They're using birch pitch as glue, heated to sticky perfection for hafting points to spears. Absurd. In freezing hell, they're basically inventing superglue from tree sap. Pain. Burning your fingers on hot pitch, but hey, now your spear won't fall apart mid-throw. Art? Debatable, but intriguing. Pigments like ochre at Maastricht Belvedere, 250,000 BCE, maybe body paint or symbols. Eagle talons from Krapina, cut for jewelry. Sarcasm, bling in the Stone Age, because nothing impresses like wearing a raptor's claw while freezing. And music? A 43,000-year-old bone flute from Divja Babe in Slovenia. Debated if Neanderthal made, but holes suggest tunes. Ironic. Jamming on a bear femur while actual bears prowl outside. Climate's the real villain. Heinrich events dump ice into oceans, chilling Europe further. Volcanoes like the Campi Flegrei eruption 39,000 BCE blanket skies in ash. Neanderthals adapt, hunker in southern refugia like Iberia. Pain, populations crash, tribes isolated, inbreeding hinted in genomes. Absurd. Surviving apocalypses only to face Sapiens arriving around 45,000 BCE. We interbred 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in non-Africans, giving us traits like red hair or immunity boosts. Ironic, they're gone, but live in us. Coexistence? For 5,000 years, maybe trade, maybe war. Fossils show violence, skulls bashed, but whose fault? Engage again. Comment. What Neanderthal trait do you wish you had? Bigger brain? Cold resistance? Hit me up. By 40,000 BCE, they're fading. Last holdouts in Gibraltar. Why? Our numbers, tech, or diseases. Pain. Watching your world shrink. Species winking out. Absurd. Bigger brains, yet outsmarted by lanky newcomers. This part's just the start. Stay for part 2. Deeper into their culture. Extinctions and Sapiens showdown. Comment. Could you survive as a Neanderthal? Hit like if hooked. Alright folks, we're diving back into the Neanderthal saga, where our thick-browed cousins are still proving they're not the grunting cavemen your high school textbook lied about. It's around 100,000 BCE, smack in the middle Paleolithic, and these Homo neanderthalensis champs are thriving in a Europe that's basically a frozen Hunger Games arena. Glaciers are creeping, predators are prowling, and survival's a daily slap in the face, yet they're crafting tools with surgical precision, burying their dead with heart-wrenching care, and maybe even doodling the first cave art. Buckle up for part 2 of their absurd, painful, and ironically epic tale, where they face the cold, the chaos, and the looming shadow of us Homo sapiens crashing their prehistoric party. The world's a brutal icebox, with the climate flipping between frigid glacials and brief thaws that tease you into thinking life might get easier. Spoiler, it doesn't. Neanderthals are scattered from sunny Iberia to the frosty steppes of what's now Russia, living in caves, rock shelters, or open-air camps when they're feeling extra brave. Picture this. You're huddled in a limestone cave, the wind screaming outside like it's auditioning for a horror flick. Your fire's flickering, fueled by bones because wood's scarce, and the smell? Unwashed bodies, singed hides, and whatever's rotting in the corner. Ironic, they're the pinnacle of evolution, yet their Airbnb rating would be 1 star for smells like death. Pain? Every day's a gamble. Keep the fire going or freeze, hunt successfully or starve, dodge a cave bear or become its lunch. Let's talk survival. Because it's a masterclass in grit and absurdity. Hunting's their bread and butter, literally, since plants are hard to come by when snow buries everything. They're taking down megafauna like woolly rhinos, bison, and horses, animals that could squash you like a bug. At sites like La Côte de Cinq, Braylade in Jersey, fossils show they drove herds off cliffs. Smart, but risky. Sarcasm alert. Nothing says teamwork like stampeding a mammoth toward a drop while praying you don't trip. A single spear thrust could break your arm. A misstep could break your everything. Fossils reveal healed fractures, smashed ribs, even head trauma. Survival meant limping back to camp, bloodied but alive. Pain. Knowing every hunt could be your last, yet going anyway, because hunger doesn't negotiate. Gathering's no picnic either. Women and kids scrounge for berries, roots, or edible bark, often in sub-zero temps. Evidence from dental tartar shows traces of cooked plants, yarrow, chamomile, maybe for medicine or just desperation. Absurd, boiling bitter weeds to survive, like the world's worst soup kitchen. Pain, thorns tearing your hands, frostbite nibbling your fingers, and the constant math of, will this feed us or kill us? Diets mostly meat, 90% in some regions, but they're not picky. Shellfish in Gibraltar, birds in France, even cannibalism at sites like El Cedron in Spain, where bones bear cut marks. Ironic, eating your cousin to avoid starvation, the ultimate family feud. Their tech game's on point though. Mousterian tools are their signature, flakes shaped into knives, scrapers, points, all from a single stone core using the Levallois technique. It's like prehistoric 3D printing, planning each chip to maximize output. They're hafting points onto spears with pitch glue, binding so strong it lasts millennia. Sarcasm, move over, Gorilla Glue. Neanderthals had tree sap and ambition. They're sewing too, using bone awls to stitch hides into clothes or tents. Absurd, tailoring a parka from bearskin while your fingers are too numb to feel the needle. Pain, one bad stitch, and your tent collapses in a blizzard, leaving you to curse in grunts. Engage with me, drop a comment. What's the wildest Neanderthal survival trick you've heard? Cliff hunts, bone needles, let's chat about their hustle. Socially, they're tight-knit, because lone wolves don't last in this world. Tribes of 10 to 30, maybe more in good times, live like extended families. Kids are trained young, flake a stone, throw a spear, or you're useless. Evidence from Dedaria Cave in Syria shows a toddler buried with a flint tool, like a prehistoric, take this to the afterlife vibe. Ironic, gifting a kid a knife for eternity when they barely survive teething. Pain of loss is everywhere. High infant mortality, with graves showing care that rips your heart out. At Shanidar Cave, another burial, Shanidar 1. A disabled man with a withered arm and blind eye lived to 40, ancient for them. His tribe cared for him, proof they weren't just brutes. Absurd, in a kill or be killed world, they're playing nurse to the weak, cultures where they shine, defying the dumb caveman stereotype. They're using red ochre, possibly for paint or rituals, at sites like Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, where perforated shells suggest jewelry. Sarcasm, bling so good it lasted 50,000 years, unlike your last Amazon impulse buy. And art? Debate rages, but Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar has cross-hatch engravings, maybe Neanderthal made, from 39,000 BCE. Ironic, we're arguing over their doodles while they were dodging extinction. Music's in play too. The Divje Babe flute, if it's theirs, shows they could carve a bare femur into a pentatonic instrument. Pain, drilling bone with flint tools, your hands bleeding for a tune. Absurd, jamming in a cave while wolves howl outside like the world's most hardcore open mic. Climate's their nemesis. Glacial cycles turn Europe into a yo-yo of freezing tundras and brief, hopeful thaws. During MIS 4, around 70,000 BCE, cold snaps shrink populations, forcing them into southern refugia, like Spain or Italy. Volcanic eruptions, like the Toba supereruption around 74,000 BCE, might have dusted skies, starving plants and game. Pain, watching herds vanish, knowing famine's next. Absurd, surviving one apocalypse only to face another when us Homo sapiens show up around 45,000 BCE, strutting in with fancier tools and bigger egos. We didn't just replace them, we partied with them. DNA shows interbreeding, 1 to 2% Neanderthal in most of us, gifting traits like tougher skin or depression-prone brains. Sarcasm. Thanks, cousins, for the immunity and the existential crises. Coexistence was messy, maybe trade, maybe fights. Sites like Grotte du Rhin in France show Châtel-Perronian tools, a mix of Neanderthal and Sapiens styles. Did they learn from us or vice versa? Ironic, they teach us blade making, then we outbreed them into oblivion. Pain, watching lanky newcomers take your hunting grounds, knowing your days are numbered. Violent spikes as we arrive. Skeletons at Le Roi in France show cut marks, maybe from Sapiens Neanderthal clashes. Absurd, fighting over a cave when there's a whole continent of misery to share. And disease? We might have brought germs from Africa they couldn't handle, like a prehistoric plague. Pain, wiping out a species not with spears but sneezes. Engage again. Comment, what's the craziest Neanderthal Sapiens crossover you can imagine? Love story? Turf war? Hit me with your theories. By 50,000 BCE, they're at their peak, mastering fire, tools, even symbolic behavior. Shanadar's flower burial? Maybe a funeral rite, maybe just pollen blowing in. Either way, it's haunting, grief in a world with no time for tears. But our arrival accelerates their decline. By 40,000 BCE, they're retreating to pockets like Gibraltar. Ironic, bigger brains, tougher bodies, yet we're the ones telling their story. Pain, knowing your kind's fading, one cave at a time. Stay tuned for part 3, deeper into their twilight, art debates, and the extinction mystery. Comment, could you handle their life, hunting rhinos or sewing with bone? Hit like if you're hooked on this prehistoric soap opera. Here we go, plunging back into the Neanderthal saga, where our burly, brow-ridged cousins are fighting tooth and nail to survive in a world that's equal parts frozen wasteland and cosmic prank. It's around 50,000 BCE, the late Middle Paleolithic, and Homo neanderthalensis is at their peak, crafting tools sharper than a reality TV comeback, burying their dead with heartbreaking care, and maybe even scratching the first hashtags into cave walls. But the clock's ticking because us Homo sapiens are knocking, bringing fancy tech, bigger tribes, and possibly a germ or two that'll rewrite history. Buckle up for part 3 of this ironic, painful, and absurdly epic tale, where Neanderthals face their twilight with grit, grace, and a whole lot of "why is this my life" vibes. The world's still a frigid nightmare, with the glaciers looming like overbearing landlords and the climate playing roulette between icy snaps and fleeting thaws. Neanderthals are holding strong from Portugal's sunny coasts to the wind-blasted plains of Ukraine, living in caves, rock shelters, or makeshift camps that scream, "We're trying our best." Picture this. You're in a damp cave, the fire spitting smoke that burns your eyes, and outside, the wind's howling like it's got a personal grudge. Your bed? A pile of hides that smell like last week's mammoth roast. Ironic, they're the most advanced species on the block, yet their daily life makes a prison cell look like a spa. Pain? Constant. Frostbite, hunger, and the ever-present risk of becoming a cave lion's chew toy. Survival's a high-stakes circus. Hunting's their lifeline, targeting beasts like reindeer, horses, or the occasional woolly rhino that could turn you into a prehistoric pancake. Sites like Le Moustier in France show they're using Levallois points, stone blades so precise they're practically surgical. They're hafting these onto spears with birch pitch glue, a process that involves heating sap until it's sticky enough to hold but not burn your fingers off. Sarcasm alert. Nothing says, "I've got this," like gluing a rock to a stick while praying it'll kill a 2-ton animal. Pain. One wrong move and you're gored, trampled, or just plain exhausted from dragging a carcass miles through snow. Fossils show they took beatings, broken jaws, crushed ribs, even a spear wound in a pelvis from Shanidar Cave. Absurd. Surviving a stab only to die from an infection, because antibiotics are 50,000 years away. Gatherings just as brutal. In glacial winters, plants are scarce, so they're digging for roots or scraping lichen off rocks. Dental evidence from Spy Cave in Belgium shows traces of grasses and tubers, maybe cooked into a mush that tastes like despair. Absurd, boiling weeds in a hide pouch while your stomach growls louder than the wolves outside. Pain, foraging in sub-zero temps, your hands bleeding from thorns, knowing one bad choice could poison the whole tribe. And yeah, cannibalism's still on the menu. Bones at Goyet Cave in Belgium have cut marks, maybe from starvation or ritual. Ironic, eating your kin to survive, then burying the rest with flowers. Talk about mixed signals. They're Texaflex though. Mousterian tools are evolving. Denticulates for sawing, scrapers for hides, points for piercing. They're using manganese dioxide to blacken pigments, maybe for art or body paint. At Pech de la Zay in France, ochre blocks show wear patterns like they're running a prehistoric art supply store. Sarcasm. Why hunt when you can grind red rocks into powder for that perfect cave selfie? They're sewing too. Bone awls for stitching hides into clothes or tents. Pain. Threading a needle with frozen fingers. Knowing a leaky tent means hypothermia. Absurd. Fashioning a parka from deerskin while the deer's cousins are plotting revenge outside. Engage with me. Drop a comment. What's the most badass Neanderthal tool you've heard of? Levallois blades? Bone awls? Let's geek out over their gear. Social life's intense. Tribes of 15 to 30, sometimes bigger, are like dysfunctional families where everyone's got a job or everyone starves. Kids are working young, napping flint, gutting fish, or learning to track. Evidence from Roque de Marsalle in France shows a child buried with care. Grave goods like shells and tools. Ironic, gifting a kid a flint knife for the afterlife when they didn't survive childhood. Pain of loss is raw. High infant mortality, with mothers burying babies in shallow graves, but compassion shines through. At La Ferracie, a disabled individual lived long enough to suggest tribal care. Absurd. In a kill or be killed world, they're carrying their sick like prehistoric paramedics. Culture's their secret weapon against the dumb caveman stereotype. Burials are elaborate. Shanidar Cave's flower burial might be ritual or just pollen, but either way it's poignant. At Cueva de los Aviones, perforated seashells and red ochre hint at jewelry or body art. Sarcasm. Nothing says I'm thriving like wearing a necklace of mussel shells while freezing your butt off. Art's a hot debate. Gorham's cave engravings dated to 39,000 BCE could be theirs. Simple crosshatches that might mean stay out or just I was bored. Pain. Carving rock with flint, your hands aching for a symbol no one might see. And that DJ Babe flute? If Neanderthal made, it's a bare bone turned pentatonic masterpiece. Absurd. Playing music in a cave where silence means spotting predators. Climate's a relentless foe. Mayes 3, around 60,000 to 30,000 BCE, brings a wild swings. Warm spells tease, then glaciers slam back. The Campi Flegrae eruption around 39,000 BCE blankets Europe in ash, starving plants and game. Neanderthals retreat to refugia like southern Spain or Italy, their population shrinking. Pain, watching your tribe dwindle, inbreeding hinted in DNA from El Sidron. Absurd, surviving volcanic winters only to face you Sapiens, who roll in around 45,000 BCE with Aurignacian tech, fancier blades, atlatls, and a knack for breeding like roaches. Our arrival's a game changer. We interbreed 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in modern non-Africans, giving us red hair, immune boosts, or even mood disorders. Ironic, they're gone, but their genes are crashing our DNA party. Coexistence lasts 5,000 to 10,000 years, maybe trading tools or ideas. Châtel-Perronian culture at Grotta du Rhin, beads, bone tools, might be Neanderthals mimicking us or vice versa. Sarcasm. They see our shiny new spears and think, great, now we're the knockoff brand. But violent spikes too. Skeletons at Saint-Césaire show trauma, maybe from Sapiens clashes. Pain. Defending your cave from lanky invaders who don't even say thanks for the DNA. Disease might have been the real killer. We brought pathogens from Africa, and Neanderthals, with less genetic diversity, could have been wiped out like Native Americans meeting smallpox. Absurd, surviving mammoths only to catch a sapiens flu. Pain, watching your kin cough themselves to death. No medicine, no hope. Sites like Lagar Velho in Portugal show a hybrid child, half sapiens, half Neanderthal, buried with care. Ironic, a love story ends in a grave, symbolizing their fading world. Engage again, comment. What's the wildest Neanderthal sapiens moment you can picture? A trade deal, a brawl, a cave romance? Spill your theories. By 40,000 BCE, they're on the ropes. Last holdouts cling to Gibraltar's caves, hunting seals and dolphins. Seafood diet, because land game's scarce. Gorham's cave shows hearths, tools, even bird bones, proof they're adapting till the end. Pain, knowing your world's shrinking, your kind's last gasp. Absurd, fighting to survive when the new kids on the block are already writing history. This is the Twilight. Part 4 is coming with their final days, extinction debates, and their legacy in us. Comment, could you live their life, hunting, grieving, surviving? Hit like if you're still hooked on this prehistoric tragedy. Here we are, at the bittersweet end of the Neanderthal saga, where our tough-as-nails cousins, Homo neanderthalensis, are staring down the barrel of extinction while still swinging for survival. It's around 40,000 BCE, and Europe's a thawing mess of retreating glaciers, shifting ecosystems, and US Homo sapiens strutting in like we own the place. Neanderthals are clinging to their last strongholds, from Gibraltar's rugged caves to the edges of the Balkans, fighting a losing battle against climate, competition, and maybe our germs. Their story's a mix of absurd resilience, gut-wrenching pain, and ironic twists, like having bigger brains yet fading into our DNA. Let's wrap this prehistoric epic with the same sarcastic, gritty dive into their final days, their mysterious end, and the legacy they left in our bones. The Ice Age is loosening its grip, but don't expect a beach party. Glaciers are retreating, leaving muddy plains and swelling rivers that turn camps into swamps. Forests of birch and pine are spreading, and megafauna like mammoths are thinning out, replaced by nimbler game, deer, boar, even fish. Neanderthals, once kings of the tundra, are now adapting to a greener, wetter world that's not exactly welcoming. Picture their last refugia, Gorham's cave in Gibraltar, a cliffside hideout where they're hunting seals and cracking open mussels. Ironic, they've survived ice ages, but now they're beach bums scraping shellfish to avoid starvation. Pain, every meal's a reminder that the herds are gone, and your old hunting grounds are underwater or overrun by lanky newcomers. Us, survival's a desperate hustle. In these final millennia, 40,000 to 28,000 BCE, they're leaning hard on versatility. Land game's scarce, so they're fishing and gathering more than ever. At Vanguard Cave, they're roasting pine nuts and eating dolphins. Dolphins! Sarcasm alert. Nothing screams, we're thriving, like wrestling Flipper for dinner. Their tools are still Mousterian masterpieces, Levallois points, scrapers, and bone-awls, but they're tweaking them for new prey. Bone harpoons for fish, smaller blades for birds. Absurd, spending hours napping a perfect point when a storm could wash your camp away. Pain, dragging a seal carcass up a cliff, knowing one slip means a broken neck, and hunger's waiting back at the cave. Daily life's a grind that'd break a modern soul. Wake up in a damp rock shelter, the sea crashing below, your fire barely alive because wet wood's all you've got. Breakfast? Maybe roasted shellfish or a rabbit you snared, plus some bitter roots that taste like regret. Tribes are smaller now, maybe 10 to 20 people, stretched thin by shrinking territories. Kids are still learning young. Gut a fish, stitch a hide, or you're no help. Women forage and craft, men hunt, but everyone's pulling double shifts. Ironic, we're stressing over emails while they're teaching 5-year-olds to spearfish in icy waves. Pain, watching your kids shiver, knowing a fever could take them, and there's no medicine, just hope and a prayer to whatever spirits you trust. Engage with me. Drop a comment. What's the toughest Neanderthal survival move you've heard in this saga? Fishing with bone harpoons? Eating dolphins? Let's hear your pick. Their tech's still a flex, even in decline. They're using every scrap, bones, hides, even bird feathers. At Fumane Cave in Italy, they're plucking raptor feathers, maybe for decoration or rituals. Sarcasm, because nothing says I'm not extinct yet like a feathered headdress while you're starving. They're still gluing points with pitch, sewing clothes with sinew. Pain, threading a bone needle when your fingers are numb from cold sea spray. Absurd, crafting a parka from sealskin while the tide's creeping closer to your cave. Cultures their defiance against oblivion. Burials keep happening, simpler but poignant. At Amud Cave in Israel, a child's grave has deer antlers placed with care. Grief that transcends millennia. Ironic, honoring the dead when you're not sure you'll survive tomorrow. Art's sparse but present. Gorham's cave has those cross-hatch engravings, possibly theirs, dated to 39,000 BCE. Were they symbols, art, or just doodles? Pain, carving stone with aching hands, leaving a mark no one might see. Absurd, creating in a world that's forgetting you. The Divja babe flute, if Neanderthal keeps haunting, music from a bare bone, played under starry skies or in smoky caves. Sarcasm. Nothing drowns out extinction like a cave jam session. Socially, it's a pressure cooker. Tribes are fragmented, pushed to margins like southern Spain or Crimea. Trades fading, fewer shells or flint traveling far. But compassion persists. At Zafariah Cave, a Neanderthal with a broken jaw lived long enough to heal, meaning someone chewed their food for them. Absurd. In a dog-eat-dog world, they're spoon-feeding the weak. Pain, knowing your tribe's shrinking, your kin dying, yet still caring for the broken. Conflicts brutal. Skeletons at Saint-Césaire and elsewhere show arrow wounds, bashed skulls. Was it us sapiens? Rival clans? Ironic, fighting over scraps when the world's big enough for everyone to suffer. Climate's a cruel X. The warming trend of MIS3 falters with cold snaps, and the Campi Flegrei eruption's ash lingers in memory, starving ecosystems. Neanderthals adapt, hunting smaller game, foraging seaweed, anything to fill bellies. Pain, watching forests replace tundras, your old tricks useless, absurd, mastering a world that keeps changing the rules. Then we sapiens arrive, full force, by 40,000 BCE, with Aurignacian tools, fancy blades, atlatls, and beads that scream, "We're extra." Our numbers explode, our tribes bigger, our tech sharper. Ironic, they've got bigger brains, but we've got population and hustle. Interbreeding's their legacies twist. Lagar Velo's hybrid child, buried with ochre and shells, shows sapiens Neanderthal love, or at least hookups. DNA proves it, 1 to 2% Neanderthal in us, from red hair to immune genes. Sarcasm. Thanks for the DNA, cousins. Sorry about the whole extinction thing. Coexistence was messy. Châtel-Perronian tools at RC-Circure blend our styles. Maybe Neanderthals copying our bling or teaching us tricks. Pain. Sharing your cave only to see it taken. Absurd, learning our ways, then fading as we thrive. Why'd they vanish? Theories abound. Our numbers, sapiens bred faster, crowding them out. Our tech, atlatls outrange their spears. Disease? We brought African bugs they couldn't fight, like a prehistoric bioweapon. Sites like Mezmaiskaya Cave in Russia show their last gasps, tools and hearths until 30,000 BCE. Pain, knowing your kind's done, your cave's empty. Absurd, surviving ice ages only to lose to germs or better marketing. Climate didn't help. Warming shifted game, and their small populations couldn't adapt fast enough. Ironic, built for cold, undone by warmth. Engage again. Comment, what's your theory on their extinction? Sapiens invasion? Disease? Climate? Spill your best guess. By 28,000 BCE, they're gone. Last echoes in Gibraltar's caves. Gorhams and Vanguard show hearths, seal bones, proof they fought till the end. Their legacy? In us, genes for tough skin, maybe even art. Ironic, like we call them primitive, yet their DNA shapes our survival. Pain, their stories buried in fossils, told by the victors. Us. This is it, the Neanderthal curtain call. From mastering fire to burying kids with antlers, they defied a brutal world with brains, heart, and absurd grit. Sarcasm. We won, but they're the ones who made us human. So raise a flint knife, or a glass, to our cousins, who lived, loved, and lost in a cosmic game they didn't choose. Comment, what's next? More ancient mysteries or something else? Hit like if this saga's got you hooked. Hey guys, imagine this. You're a scrappy Homo sapiens in Africa 200,000 years ago, dodging lions, starving through droughts, and deciding the grass might be greener, or at least less deadly, somewhere else. But somewhere else means trekking across deserts, seas, and ice, facing horrors that make your bad day look like a vacation. That's the great human migration out of Africa, a chaotic exodus of grit, luck, and sheer absurdity that peopled the world. We survived by the skin of our teeth, but, oh, the pain, Let's unpack this epic nightmare with a smirk. Picture the cradle of humanity, Africa, around 200,000 BCE. The continent's a wild mosaic of savannas, jungles, and deserts, teeming with beasts that see you as lunch. Our ancestors, early Homo sapiens, emerged in places like Ethiopia's Omo Valley or Morocco's Jebel Irhoud, with brains big enough to dream but bodies fragile as twigs. Ironic, isn't it? We call ourselves wise man, yet we're born into a world where wisdom means not getting eaten by a hyena while pooping. The pain of survival? Constant. Infant mortality sky high. Half your kids don't make it past 5, claimed by disease, predators, or just bad luck. You hunt with sharpened sticks, gather berries that might poison you, and huddle in rock shelters praying the rain doesn't flood your fire. But why stay? Climate's the ultimate jerk. The Pleistocene's glacial cycles turn Africa into a yo-yo of wet and dry. During marine isotope stage 6, around 195,000 to 130,000 BCE, mega droughts scorch the land, lakes dry up, and herds vanish. Absurd. Nature's like, hey, evolve big brains, then watch your waterhole become a dust bowl. Populations crash, forcing small bands, maybe 20 to 50 people, to migrate within Africa first. From East Africa's Rift Valley, they spread south to the Cape, north to the Maghreb, adapting to everything from rainforests to coasts. Pain, trekking hundreds of miles on blistered feet, carrying kids and elders, only to find the next valleys just as hostile. Early sapiens aren't alone. Other hominins like Homo erectus or Denisovans lurk, but Africa's our solo stage. Fossils at Herto in Ethiopia, 160,000 BCE, show us with modern faces, crafting tools like hand axes from obsidian. Sarcasm time. Great, we've got shiny rocks to chop meat, but try using one on a charging elephant without becoming a smear. Social life? Tribes bound by necessity, share or die. Marriages seal alliances, stories around fires ward off dark. But absurdity reigns. You're inventing language, grunting proto-words while arguing over who gets the last marrow bone. By 130,000 BCE, the Eemian interglacial brings wetter times, greening the Sahara into a savanna paradise. Lakes bloom, hippos splash where dunes now stand. Populations boom, maybe 10,000 sapiens total, but that's enough to push boundaries. Some venture north via the Sinai or west along coasts. Evidence at Fazan in Libya shows early sapiens traces, but most attempts fizzle. Ironic, the green Sahara tempts you out, but deserts snap back, stranding explorers in sand tombs. Pain, dying of thirst, mirages mocking you, bones bleaching under a sun that doesn't care. Engage with me, drop a comment. What's the craziest survival challenge you think early humans faced in Africa? Droughts? Predators? Let's discuss. Fast forward to 100,000 BCE. Africa's pulsing with life, but overcrowding and climate flips spark the itch to leave. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, 75,000 BCE, we find ochre engravings, cross hatches on stone, maybe art or symbols. Absurd. In a world of constant death, someone's doodling hashtags. They're crafting bone tools, fishing with hooks, even wearing shell beads. Sarcasm, bling before bread, priorities. This cognitive revolution hits around 70,000 to 100,000 BCE. Brains wiring for abstract thought, planning migrations that aren't suicide missions. But leaving Africa's no walk in the park. The first waves flop. School and Kafsa caves in Israel, 120,000 to 90,000 BCE, show sapiens venturing into the Levant during a wet spell. They hunt gazelle, craft Levallois tools, bury dead with antlers, rituals in alien land. Ironic, you escape Africa's droughts only to hit Eurasia's Neanderthals, who eye you like unwanted guests. Pain, clashing over caves, your band decimated by cold snaps that drive you back or wipe you out. By 80,000 BCE, these outposts vanish, sapiens retreating to Africa as glaciers advance. Climate sadistic. The Toba supervolcano erupts around 74,000 BCE, blanketing skies in ash, triggering a volcanic winter. Africa chills, populations bottleneck, maybe down to 10,000 breeding adults. Absurd, evolve for warmth, then freeze because a mountain in Indonesia burps. Pain, starvation stalks, tribes fracturing, forcing innovation or extinction. But we adapt, better tools, fire mastery, social networks widening. Mitochondrial DNA traces Eve to this era, a common ancestor whose daughters seed the world. By 70,000 BCE, the out of Africa push gains steam. Wetter phases green the Arabian Peninsula, creating migration corridors. Coastal routes beckon, follow shorelines, feast on shellfish, avoid inland horrors. Sites like Jebel Faya in UAE, 125,000 BCE, show early tools, but the big waves later. Sarcasm. Why cross deserts when you can beach hop, dodging sharks instead of scorpions? Pain. Waves crashing your raft, salt stinging wounds, kids crying as you paddle makeshift boats from reeds. The southern route, across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, then east along Arabian coasts to India and beyond. Around 60,000 to 70,000 BCE, Sapiens hit Sundaland, now Indonesia, then a landmass. Absurd, trek to paradise only for sea levels to rise, drowning your path. Pain, navigating mangroves, battling monsoons, diseases like malaria evolving to plague you. Fossils at Naya Cave in Borneo, 40,000 BCE, hint at early arrivals, but dates debate. Northern route, through Sinai into the Levant, clashing with Neanderthals. By 55,000 BCE we're in Europe, but first the Middle East. Manot Cave in Israel, 55,000 BCE, shows sapien skulls. Ironic, meet cousins, swap genes. Hello, 2% Neanderthal DNA, then outcompete them. Pain, interbreeding's romantic till violence erupts. Skulls bashed, territories stolen. Engage again, comment. What migration route sounds most hellish? Coastal or desert? Hit me with your thoughts. As sapiens spread, tech evolves absurdly. In Africa, Howison's port industry. Fine blades, back tools for arrows. Export this to Asia. Tian Yuan Cave in China. 40,000 BCE, early Asians with African roots. Australia by 65,000 BCE. Lake Mungo's 40,000-year-old burials, but older dates suggest boat voyages across Wallace Line. Sarcasm. Invent seafaring because swimming 50 miles is too easy. Pain. Storms sinking rafts. Arrivals facing megafauna like giant kangaroos that fight back. In India, by 60,000 BCE, sapiens at Chwalapuram survived Toba's ash, adapting with microliths. Absurd. Volcano tries to kill you. You make tinier tools and thrive. Pain. Ash-choked skies, coughing lungs, yet pushing to Southeast Asia. Europe's the big prize, but Neanderthals own it. Around 50,000 BCE, we infiltrate via the Danube or Bosporus. Ustyuzhim in Siberia. 45,000 BCE, a sapiens thigh bone with Neanderthal DNA fresh from mixing. Ironic. Hook up with cousins, inherit cold resistance, then edge them out. Pain. Freezing tundras, hunting mammoths with atlatls, bones aching from cold. This migration's a horror show of endurance. Small bands, 20 to 50, trek 10 to 20 miles a day, carrying everything. Lose a member to a river crossing, grieve by firelight. Absurd. Populate the world by accident, chasing game or fleeing famine. Pain. Every step a risk. Break an ankle, you're left behind. Birth on the trail, pray the baby survives. By 50,000 BCE, sapiens' footprint spans from Africa to Australia, Asia's edges. The Americas wait, but that's later. Ironic. Start as underdogs, end as conquerors, leaving hominin rivals extinct. Pain. Countless lost in the journey, unnamed heroes in our DNA. Stay tuned for part 2, deeper into Asian and European pushes, interbreeding dramas, and more absurdity. Comment. Would you migrate back then? Hit like if hooked. Alright folks, we're back in the wild sprawling chaos of the great human migration, where our Homo sapiens ancestors are stumbling out of Africa like they missed the memo on how brutal the world is. It's roughly 70,000 to 50,000 BCE, and these scrappy pioneers are pushing into Asia, Australia, and the edges of Europe, dodging monsoons, predators, and their own questionable decisions. The climate's a sadistic prankster, games getting scarce, and they're meeting Neanderthals and Denisovans who probably wish they'd RSVP'd no to this sapiens invasion. Buckle up for part 2 of this absurd, pain-soaked epic, dripping with irony and the kind of survival hustle that makes modern life look like a nap. Africa's still the cradle, but it's a crowded one. Population booms and climate swings, wet phases turning deserts green, then dry spells torching the land, push our ancestors to keep moving. The Sahara is a fickle friend, briefly lush around 70,000 BCE, opening corridors to the north and east. But don't get comfy, it snaps back to sand, stranding anyone dumb enough to linger. Ironic, nature dangles a paradise, then yanks it away like a cosmic bait and switch. Pain, trekking with your tribe, kids on your back, only to find the oasis you aimed for is now a dune. Survival's a gamble, starvation, dehydration, or a leopard that sees you as a snack. Absurd. You're the wise man, yet you're betting your life on a waterhole that might not exist. The southern route's the big play, coastal hopping along the Arabian Peninsula toward India, Southeast Asia, and beyond. Around 65,000 BCE, Sapiens crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, maybe on rafts made of reeds or logs. Sarcasm alert. Nothing says great idea like paddling across shark-infested waters with a baby strapped to your chest. Sites like Jebel Faya in the UAE show stone tools, early signs of sapiens passing through. Pain, waves batter your flimsy raft, salt burns your eyes, and you're praying the next shore has food. By 60,000 BCE, there in India, Jwalapuram's tools survived Toba's ash cloud from 74,000 BCE, proof of grit. Absurd. A volcano tries to nuke you, so you double down with sharper rocks. Australia's the wildest flex. By 65,000 BCE, sapiens hit Sahel, modern Australia and New Guinea, then one landmass. Lake Mungo's burials, dated to 40,000 BCE, suggest earlier arrivals, meaning they crossed the Wallace Line, a deep-sea barrier. Ironic, invent boats to reach a continent full of giant wombats that could crush you. Pain, navigating 50-mile sea gaps, storms sinking your logs, landing to face megafauna like Diprotodon, a hippo-sized marsupial with zero chill. They're fishing, hunting, and painting. Majid Baby's rock art hints at early creativity. Sarcasm, survive a sea voyage, then doodle on a cave wall to celebrate not drowning. Engage with me. Drop a comment. What's the most insane migration feat so far? Rafting to Australia? Surviving Toba? Let's hear your take. Asia's a sprawling frontier. By 60,000 BCE, sapiens are in South Asia, crafting microliths, tiny blades for arrows or sickles. Bhimbetka in India has rock shelters with early art, maybe maps or hunting scenes. Absurd. You're starving, yet you're etching buffalo on a rock like it's Instagram. Pain. Monsoons flood your camp. Malaria from new mosquito pals kills your kin. Eastward, they hit Sundaland, now Indonesia, then a lush peninsula. Naya Cave in Borneo, 46,000 BCE, shows sapiens' skulls and tools. Ironic, you trek to paradise only for rising seas to drown it, forcing you to move again. The northern route's tougher through the Levant into Eurasia. Manot Cave in Israel, 55,000 BCE, has sapiens' bones, signs of early clashes or hookups with Neanderthals. DNA tells the tale. 1 to 2% Neanderthal in non-Africans, gifting us cold tolerance and maybe a tendency to brood. Sarcasm. Thanks for the genes, cousins. Sorry we stole your caves. Pain. Meeting stocky locals who don't share, their spears as sharp as yours. By 50,000 BCE, we're pushing into Europe via the Danube or Bosporus, but Asia's first. Tian Yuan Cave in China, 40,000 BCE, shows sapiens with African roots, hunting deer and crafting bone tools. Absurd? Cross a continent to find winters harsher than home. Techs evolving absurdly fast. Howison's port tools, backed blades, early bow tech, spread from Africa to Asia. In Sri Lanka, Bata Domba Lena Cave, 36,000 BCE, has microliths and shell beads. Sarcasm. Nothing screams civilized like wearing snail shells while dodging pythons. They're fishing with nets, trapping birds, even experimenting with plants, grasses ground into flour. Pain, grinding seeds with rocks, calluses bleeding, knowing one bad harvest means famine. Ironic, you're inventing agriculture while running from tigers. Social life's raw. Tribes of 20 to 50, nomadic, bound by blood and survival. Kids learn to hunt or gather young. Miss a shot and the tribe goes hungry. Marriages, strategic, linking clans for resources. Absurd, proposing with a flint knife because roses aren't a thing. Pain, losing half your kids to fever, burying them with ochre under a tree. Burials show care. Tam Pa Ling in Laos, 46,000 BCE, a grave with tools, proof of ritual. Ironic, honoring the dead when you're not sure you'll eat tomorrow. Climate's a relentless foe. My S4, around 70,000 to 60,000 BCE, brings cold snaps, shrinking forests. Herds shift, forcing longer treks. In Asia, monsoons alternate with droughts, turning jungles to dust. Pain, watching game vanish, your kids' ribs showing. Absurd, adapting to new lands only for the weather to flip again. Volcanic ash lingers from Toba, choking skies. Sapiens survive by diversifying. Fish, hunt, gather, anything to avoid extinction's hug. Neanderthals and Denisovans complicate things. In Siberia, Ust-Ishim's 45,000-year-old femur shows fresh Neanderthal interbreeding. Denisovans, mysterious Asian cousins, mix too. DNA in modern Melanesians proves it. Sarcasm, great, a prehistoric love triangle, but someone's getting extinct. Pain, clashing over caves, your spear no match for their experience. Sites like Denisova Cave show layered occupations. Sapiens, Denisovans, Neanderthals sharing space, maybe not peacefully. Absurd, trading beads one day, throwing punches the next. Violent spikes, skulls at Narmada in India, 50,000 BCE show trauma, maybe inner hominin or just bad hunting days. Ironic, you migrate for a better life, find rivals who'd rather bash than barter. Disease lurks too, new lands, new pathogens. Pain, watching kin die from fevers your shamans can't cure, no herbs helping. Engage again. Comment, what's the wildest sapiens other hominin encounter you can imagine? Romance, rumble, spill your ideas. By 50,000 BCE, sapiens are everywhere. India, Southeast Asia, Australia, edging into Europe. The Oreniation culture's brewing with fancy blades and art. Bacho Kiro in Bulgaria, 46,000 BCE, shows sapiens tools and beads pushing Neanderthals out. Pain, displacing cousins who taught you fire. Absurd, conquering a continent by accident, chasing deer. Ironic, we're the underdogs, yet we're writing the story. Part 3's coming, Europe's conquest, more interbreeding, and the dawn of art. Comment, could you survive their trek? Hit like if you're hooked. Alright, buckle up, we're diving back into the great human migration, where our Homo sapiens ancestors are charging through Asia and Europe like they're on a prehistoric road trip with no GPS and a death wish. It's around 50,000 to 35,000 BCE, and these scrappy wanderers are spreading like wildfire, leaving Africa's dust behind to conquer frozen tundras, steamy jungles, and every nightmare in between. They're clashing with Neanderthals, flirting with Denisovans, and inventing culture on the fly, all while the climate plays cruel tricks and predators remind them who's really in charge. This is part 3 of our ironic, pain-drenched saga, served with a smirk and enough absurdity to make you wonder how we ever survived. The world's a chaotic mess. Europe's thawing from MIS-3's cold snaps, but glaciers still loom, and forests are spreading like uninvited guests. Asia's a maze of monsoons and deserts, while Australia's already colonized by sapiens who somehow thought rafting to a land of giant killer marsupials was a solid plan. Climate's the ultimate troll. Warm spells lure you north, then sudden freezes turn your camp into an ice rink. Ironic, you're the wise man, but nature's laughing as you slip on frozen mud, chasing deer that are smarter than you. Pain, every step's a risk. Break a leg crossing a river and you're left behind, your tribe mourning as wolves circle. Europe's the new frontier, and sapiens are infiltrating like uninvited party crashers. By 46,000 BCE, Bacho Kiro Cave in Bulgaria shows our Oreniation tools, fancy blades, bone awls, and beads that scream, "We're extra." Sarcasm alert, nothing says I've arrived, like wearing fox teeth jewelry while freezing your butt off. We're pushing Neanderthals to the margins, their caves now ours. Ust-Ishim in Siberia, 45,000 BCE, has a sapiens femur with fresh Neanderthal DNA. Proof we're not just fighting, there's some prehistoric hanky-panky going on. Pain, Swapping genes with cousins who might stab you over a hunting ground. Absurd. Hooking up in a cave, then stealing their fire to cook your dinner. Asia's still a hotspot. In China, Tian Yuan Man's 40,000-year-old bones show African roots, with microliths for hunting deer or boar. Southeast Asia is a jungle gauntlet. Naya Cave in Borneo, 46,000 BCE, has sapien skulls and tools, proof we're braving tigers and malaria. Ironic, you escape Africa's leopards only to meet Asia's bigger, angrier cats. Pain, hacking through vines, your kid sick with fever, no medicine but chewed leaves that might make it worse. Australia's sapiens, at sites like Majid Baby, are painting rock art and hunting megafauna, giant kangaroos that could kick you into next week. Sarcasm, great job crossing oceans to fight a 10-foot marsupial with a stick. Engage with me, drop a comment. What's the wildest place you think sapiens reached in this era? Siberia's tundras, Australia's outback? Let's talk destinations. Tech's a lifeline and a flex. Aurignacian culture brings sleek blades, atlatls for spear throwing, and bone tools polished to perfection. In Europe, Grotta Chauvet's 36,000 BCE cave art, lions, rhinos, painted with charcoal, shows we're not just surviving, we're creating. Absurd, risking your life in a dark cave to draw a horse when you're starving. Pain, mixing pigments with spit, your hands numb from cold, knowing a bear might claim your canvas. In Asia, Bhimbetkha's rock shelters in India have 40,000-year-old etchings, maybe maps or rituals. Sarcasm, nothing screams priorities like sketching a buffalo while dodging monsoons. Social life's raw and brutal. Tribes of 20 to 50 roam, following game or fleeing floods. Kids or mini adults, napping flint or fishing by 6. Marriages bind clans, but love's secondary to survival. Ironic, proposing with a shell necklace when you're both half-starved. Pain, burying a spouse after a hunt gone wrong, their grave marked with ochre and tears. Burials get elaborate. Sungir in Russia, 34,000 BCE, has kids buried with 10,000 ivory beads, a labor of months. Absurd, crafting jewelry for the dead when you're not sure you'll eat tomorrow. Shamans emerge, leading rituals with painted bones or feathers. Sarcasm, trusting a guy in a deer skull to talk to spirits when the spirits keep sending blizzards. Conflict's a constant. Neanderthals are fading, but not without a fight. Krapina in Croatia, 40,000 BCE, shows Neanderthal bones with cut marks. Sapiens' violence or ritual? Pain, clashing over a cave, blood spilling on frozen ground. Denisovans in Asia are trickier. Denisova Cave in Siberia, 50,000 BCE, has their DNA mixed with ours, especially in Melanesians. Ironic, we're family, yet we're pushing them out. Absurd, trading tools one day, throwing punches the next. Skeletons at school in Israel show trauma, maybe from sapiens Neanderthal brawls. Pain, losing kin to rivals, knowing you're the invader. Climate's a cruel puppeteer. Cold snaps hit Europe. MI3's warm spells giving way to frost. Herds shift. Reindeer replace mammoths, forcing new hunting tricks. In Asia, monsoons flood camps, then droughts parch them. Pain, watching your kids' ribs show as game vanishes. Absurd, adapting to jungles, then tundras, then back, because nature can't pick a lane. Sea levels rise, drowning coastal camps in Sunderland. Ironic, you conquer a continent only for the ocean to steal it. Engage again. Comment. What's the toughest migration challenge you can imagine? Freezing in Siberia? Drowning in monsoons? Spill your thoughts. Diet's a survival puzzle. In Europe, we're hunting reindeer and rabbits, using atlatls for distance. In Asia, fishing's big, nets and bone hooks at Tianhuadong Cave, 40,000 BCE. Sarcasm, nothing's tastier than fish caught while dodging crocodiles. Plants are key, grinding grasses into flour, risking poison for calories. Pain, chewing roots that taste like dirt, your stomach growling. Absurd, inventing cuisine when half your meal might kill you. Cannibalism pops up. Naya cave bones show cut marks, maybe desperation. Ironic, eating a neighbor to survive, then painting their portrait on a rock. Cultures blooming despite the chaos. In Europe, Aurignacian beads, ivory, shell show status or trade. Venus figurines, like Willendorf's 30,000 BCE statuette, hint at fertility cults or just art for art's sake. Pain, carving ivory with flint, your fingers bleeding for a goddess who doesn't stop the cold. Absurd, sculpting a tiny woman while real women are foraging in snow. Music's alive, flutes from whole fells, 35,000 BCE, carved from vulture bones, play pentatonic notes. Sarcasm, nothing soothes a mammoth hunt like a cave jam session. Disease is a silent killer. New lands mean new pathogens. Malaria in Asia, infections in Europe. Pain, watching kin die from fevers, no cure but hope. Ironic, survive saber-toothed cats only to fall to invisible bugs. Neanderthal DNA helps, immune genes we stole, but low genetic diversity dooms them. Absurd, we're the germy invaders wiping out cousins with coughs. By 35,000 BCE, Sapiens dominate. Europe's ours. Kostenki in Russia, 40,000 BCE, has Sapiens camps with mammoth bone huts. Asia's locked down. Lujiang in China, 68,000 to 30,000 BCE, shows our spread. Australia's thriving despite megafauna threats. Pain, building a home, knowing a flood could take it. Absurd, conquering continents by accident, chasing deer. Ironic, Neanderthals fade, yet their genes linger in our skin. Part 4 is coming, the final push to the Americas, art's explosion, and Sapiens' global takeover. Comment, could you hack their life? Hunting, painting, surviving? Hit like if this epic's got you hooked. Here we are, folks, at the grand finale of the great human migration, where our Homo sapiens ancestors are sealing their claim as the ultimate road warriors of prehistory. It's 35,000 to 10,000 BCE, and these relentless wanderers have already stormed Asia, Australia, and Europe, leaving Neanderthals and Denisovans in their dust. Now they're pushing deeper into frozen tundras, crossing seas, and even eyeing the Americas, all while juggling art, music, and the constant threat of becoming a saber-toothed snack. Climate's a cruel jester, culture's exploding, and survival's a daily dose of pain wrapped in absurdity. Let's close this saga with the same ironic smirk, gut-punch reality, and sarcastic swagger that's carried us through. Europe's a frozen battleground, thawing just enough to tease hope before slamming you with blizzards. By 35,000 BCE, the Aurignacian culture's in full swing. Sapiens are crafting blades so sharp they could shave a mammoth if mammoths cared about grooming. Sites like Kostenki in Russia show mammoth bone huts built to withstand sub-zero hell. Ironic, you're building a house from extinct giants while praying you don't join them. Pain, hauling tons of bone through snow, your hands cracked and bleeding, knowing one storm could collapse your masterpiece. Asia's no picnic either. Liujiang in China, dated to 30,000 BCE, has sapiens hunting in jungles where tigers see you as takeout. Australia's sapiens, at Majid Baby, are dodging giant marsupials while painting rock art like prehistoric Picassos. Sarcasm. Nothing says I've got time like sketching a kangaroo that could kick your spine in half. The big push now is toward the Americas, but it's a slog. By 30,000 BCE, sapiens are in Siberia's brutal tundras. Malta Burat shows camps with ivory carvings and burials. They're crossing Beringia, a land bridge linking Asia to Alaska, exposed by low sea levels. Absurd, trekking thousands of miles to a frozen wasteland because the deer ran that way. Pain, frostbite eating your toes, your kids shivering under hides as you cross ice fields hoping for a better tomorrow. By 15,000 BCE, they hit Monteverde in Chile. Tools, hearths, even seaweed snacks. Sarcasm. Congrats, you crossed a continent for a beach picnic with no Wi-Fi. Ironic. You conquer a new world, only for rising seas to drown your bridge home. Engage with me. Drop a comment. What's the craziest migration leap in this saga? Siberia to Alaska? Australia's seas? Let's hear your pick. Tech's a survival superpower. In Europe, Gravettian culture, 30,000 to 20,000 BCE, brings sewing needles from bone, letting you stitch tighter clothes against the cold. Atlatls hurl spears farther, giving you a shot at reindeer without getting gored. Absurd, inventing tech that'd impress NASA, yet you're still dodging wolves with bad breath. Pain, napping flint till your fingers bleed, knowing a dull blade means no dinner. In Asia, microliths are everywhere. Tiny blades for arrows, fish hooks, even early sickles. Tianhuadong Cave in China has nets for fishing, proof we're outsmarting nature. Sarcasm. Catch a fish, feel like a genius, then realize it's poisonous. Culture's exploding despite the chaos. Europe's cave art peaks. Lascaux, 17,000 BCE, has bison and horses painted with such skill you'd think they had art school. Pain. Crawling through dark caves, torch flickering to draw a deer no one sees for millennia. Absurd. Creating masterpieces while starving, like a starving artist with actual stakes. Venus figurines, like Dolny Vestonis's 29,000 BCE ceramic statuette, hint at fertility worship or just aesthetic obsession. Ironic. Sculpting goddesses when real women are out foraging in blizzards. Music's big, whole fells flutes, 35,000 BCE play haunting notes. Sarcasm. Nothing calms a starving tribe like a vulture bone symphony. Social life's a pressure cooker. Tribes grow to 50 to 100 in good times, splitting when food's scarce. Kids work young, hunting, crafting, or their dead weight. Burials are lavish. Sungir's kids, 34,000 BCE, wear thousands of ivory beads a year's work. Pain. Crafting grave goods for a child, knowing you'll bury another next year. Absurd. Decorating the dead when you're not sure you'll eat. Shamans lead with feathers and chants, claiming spirit connections. Ironic. Trusting a guy in a wolf pelt to predict weather when it's always awful. Conflicts brutal. Neanderthals are gone by 28,000 BCE, pushed out by our numbers and tech. Denisovans fade too. Denisova Cave's last traces, 40,000 BCE, show Sapiens takeover. Skulls at Kostenki show trauma, maybe from rival tribes or megafauna hunts gone wrong. Pain. Losing kin to a spear, blood soaking the snow. Absurd. Fighting over a frozen valley when everyone's just trying to survive. Disease stalks, new pathogens and new lands, no immunity. Ironic. Survive a bear, die from a cough. Pain. Watching fever take your family, no herbs helping. Engage again. Comment. What's your theory on how sapiens outlasted other hominins? Tech, numbers, germs. Spill your guess. Climate's a merciless foe. The last glacial maximum, 26,000 to 19,000 BCE, freezes Europe, forcing sapiens into southern refugia, like Iberia. Asia's monsoons and droughts keep camps on the move. Pain. Watching herds vanish, your kids' bellies empty. Absurd. Adapting to ice, then heat, then ice again, because nature's a sadist. Rising seas drown Sundaland and Beringia, erasing migration routes. Ironic. Conquer a continent, watch the ocean claim it. Diet's a gamble. In Europe, reindeer and rabbits are staples, hunted with traps and atlatls. In Asia, fish and rice grasses, ground into flour, keep tribes alive. Pain. Chewing roots that taste like mud, praying they're not toxic. Absurd. Inventing bread while running from lions. America's early sites, like Clovis, 13,000 BCE, show mammoth hunts with fluted points. Sarcasm. Nothing's tastier than a 10-ton steak you risked your life for. Cannibalism lingers. Bones at Gough's Cave, 14,700 BCE, have cut marks. Ironic. Eat your neighbor, then carve their bones into tools. By 10,000 BCE, sapiens rule. Europe's Magdalenian culture hunts with bows, paints caves like Altamira. Asia's Jomon culture in Japan, 14,000 BCE, experiments with pottery, early farming vibes. The Americas' Clovis points kill megafauna, though overhunting dooms them. Pain. Watching mammoths vanish, knowing you helped. Absurd. Building a world by destroying it. Ironic, we're global, yet our cousins, Neanderthals, Denisovans, are fossils, their DNA in our veins. This is it, the migration's end. From Africa's savannas to America's plains, sapiens conquered with grit, art, and dumb luck. Pain. Countless died, unnamed, to get us here. Absurd. We peopled the planet chasing dinner, not destiny. Sarcasm. Congrats, we won, but at what cost? Raise a flint knife, or a glass, to our ancestors, who turned a brutal world into our starting line. Comment. What's next? more ancient epics or something else. Hit like if this saga's kept you glued. They came with frozen breath in their mouths and hope packed into their skins like spare ribs. Or maybe that was the spare ribs. Either way, someone had to eat first. Welcome to the first chapter of a very old, very cold, and accidentally hilarious tragedy called How Humans Claimed a Continent. Picture a map, except the map is wrong. Iceberg hairballs blotting out coastlines, and every arrow you draw is an insult to cartography. Now, picture a family. One too many opinions, one too few warm coats, and a baby who cries with the conviction of a tribal council voting no on frostbite. That baby will grow up to be a footnote in notebooks, but right now the baby demands attention and toasted moss. If you're watching, type in the comments, which ancestor would you trade for a lifetime supply of blankets? Go on, pick a name. I'm waiting. They were not discoverers in the cinematic, triumphant sense. They were accidental explorers whose GPS was the sky and whose sense of direction was the type developed by seasons of following migrating herds in bad weather. The Ice Age, that epic bureaucrat of climate, had turned half the world into a landfill of glaciers and stubbornly misfiled mountains. But it also made something strange and crucial. Land where there had been sea. The ocean withdrew like it was embarrassed by its own boundary issues, exposing a bridge of tundra and mud we now call Beringia, a broad, cold expanse linking Siberia to what would become Alaska. Imagine Beringia as the world's most exclusive pop-up mall for life. Plants shrank to tough snacks. Herds of hairy animals wandered like lost hotel guests. Mammoths lumbered like carpet-covered SUVs. Steppe bison snorted the volume of a small hurricane. And giant sloths, yes, giant sloths pretending to be surprisingly graceful, browsed on. Anything that dared to taste like green. Humans arrived at the mall with crude spears, good shoes, not intentionally, and the human compulsion to invent dramatic slogans like, "We came, we saw, we hypothermia'd." The first Americans were not a single family with a banner and a unified mission statement. They were many micro-societies, pockets of people who had learned how to survive on the edge of what counts as breakfast. Some moved in small, nimble groups following the herds. Others hugged the ice, treating glaciers like walls in a cosmic labyrinth. There were coastal foragers, beachcombers of doom who chased fish and shellfish along jagged, receding shorelines that were then miles from the present-day coast. And there were inland hunters who took bets on whether a spear could pierce the hide of an enraged megafauna beast. Spoiler, sometimes yes, sometimes you ran out of bets. Imagine a leader, call her Anu because names are fun, pacing a fringe camp at dusk. She could read the weather like you read an email, with suspicion and regret. Anu squinted at the sky, at the hopeless sun that spent half the day apologizing for being so dim, and made choices. Do we follow the mammoth herd into an ice canyon with a 70% chance of shelter and a 40% chance of falling into a crevasse? Or do we stay and attempt to make a hearth that will not immediately be used as an offering to the snow gods? She chooses mammoth. They choose life. Sometimes the mammoth were generous. Sometimes they were really not. Daily survival looked like a montage of improvisation. Tools were carved with a level of elegance usually reserved for tiny, pointy things on a hipster's coffee table. Needles, scrapers that double as needles. Humans renegotiated the concept of useful. Clothing was couture made by necessity. Sewn furs, stitched fatigue, hats that whispered, "We may be cold, but at least we look fatalistically stylish." Hygiene was optional. Humor was mandatory. Singing to the fire was how you kept it from abandoning you emotionally and possibly physically. Travel was a long, aching math problem. Distances were measured not in miles, but in endurance, and how many frozen toes you could sacrifice before morale demanded a dance break. They followed seasonal patterns, migration of animals, thawing of rivers, appearance of edible roots, a cyclical calendar penned in hoof prints and star smudges. They learned the dramatic art of reading the land. A bend in the river meant game water. A patch of shrubby growth meant small birds with brains big enough to escape a bad spear throw. A cluster of stones might hide a cave or a booby trap set by something with fewer opinions than humans. And there was hunger, the kind that teaches you the etymology of patience. Food strategies were inventive to the brink of ridicule. Drying meat on racks over smoky pits, rendering fat into portable energy like a prehistoric battery, mixing whatever berries were not trying to kill you into something palatable. Sometimes they ate the brains of animals, which the anthropological board probably advises against unless you're sure about the incubation period of curiosity-related pathogens. They also ate seaweed like it was a culinary revolution. Occasionally, they ate each other's ideas about social hierarchy, which is to say, gossiping around a fire was a vital survival skill. Conflict was inevitable, but not always cinematic. Imagine two groups meeting at a river, crossing with shortage of wood vibes. Instead of dramatic sword duels, there were negotiations conducted through gestures, exchange of crafted goods, and the social ritual of pretending to admire someone's bone flute. Trade circulated, obsidian for meat, beads for knowledge, a particularly curious stone for a pair of trade secrets. When violence happened, it was earnest and immediate and messy in ways that did not make for polite notebook entries. But violence was not the default. Cooperation was. After all, the world was massive, cruel, and very good at freezing you into silence. Meanwhile, evolution, the relentless tinkerer, was offering rewards. These people were not static. They adapted their diets, their tools, the ways they sang lullabies to less certain nights. Language was nascent and likely full of onomatopoeia, because when you live in a place that makes loud noises, your language becomes loud and useful. Stories passed beside the flames, each one wearing a coat of exaggeration like ceremonial armor. Myths were practical. They taught children where to avoid a crevasse and when to make offerings to weather spirits that, if nothing else, appreciated the flattery. Let's be absurdly specific for a moment. Imagine a hunter who returns with a spear and a story that shifts with the amount of ale consumed later. He claims to have faced a mammoth that snorted like a thunderclap and blinked like a judgmental ancestor. The group hears the tale, asks for the mammoth's name, and he invents one on the spot. That mammoth becomes a character in their oral world, an allegory for the kind of bad neighbor you'd avoid at potlucks. These stories shaped identity. We are the people who outwitted the mammoth named Reginald eventually becomes we are the people, and suddenly there's a tribe. And with time, a slow, relentless current, the archaeological record will call some of these people Clovis, pre-Clovis, Kennewick, natives, Paleo-Americans, and a dozen more labels that read like a filing system gone philosophically wrong. Those labels are modern attempts to tidy chaos. In reality, human movements were messy, overlapping, contradictory, brilliant, and frankly, rude to tidy categorization. Some waves of people moved inland, taking advantage of ice-free corridors. Others hugged the coasts in a style of migration that can only be described as strategic seafood optimism. Routes that were once supply lines became mythic pathways. The environment was capricious. Glaciers advanced and retreated like temperamental theater curtains. At times, the land opened up and offered passageways. At other times, it slammed them shut, leaving groups stranded and forced to invent survival plans worthy of a reality show no one would greenlight today. Stranded with my extended family, 5 dogs, 3 goats, and dramatic mood lighting. That could be a show title. They coped, they adapted. New tools appeared, blades with the kind of precision you'd expect from someone who has to cut through frozen meat in existential dread. The bow and arrow? Not yet. The spear? Oh yes. Hunting techniques diversified, ambushes, drives where groups would funnel animals into traps, and the subtle use of fire to manipulate the landscape and herd behavior. There were also rites, tender and bewildering. Burial practices, when they existed, ranged from hurried to lavish, with some communities wrapping their dead in thoughtful textiles and grave goods that scream both respect and the ancient human tendency to take things just in case the afterlife. Likes practical gifts. Sometimes babies were buried under thresholds. Sometimes elders were given elaborate send-offs. Grief was a communal task, done in a chorus of howls and carefully selected lamentations, the better to keep wolves from making the funeral into a buffet. But onto the epic absurdity. New ice opens a land corridor, and suddenly the continent receives a drip feed of humans like a very long, cold party trick. Some groups push farther interior, chasing game into the unknown. Some attempt naive agriculture with crops that, frankly, are not yet ready for a relationship. Plants are stubborn, life is messy, people keep going. The ones who survive develop regional flavors, not of food, necessarily, but of technique and worldview. Language branches, tool styles diverge, and before long, islanders of the ice and plains nomads gossip about those people who think a mammoth is a good idea for a pet, with the same tone you use when judging a cousin's questionable tattoo. Intergroup relations evolve. There's the occasional grand migration, where entire bands move in a coordinated fashion, building temporary settlements where the geography allows. These settlements act like ancient pop-up markets and gossip centers. Pottery appears only later, which is fortuitous because pottery is heavy and fragile, and the Ice Age did not deal in fragile. But when pottery does appear, it's like a symbolic luxury, the equivalent of someone inventing cups after centuries of drinking from shells in sheer obstinacy. Survival strategies include risky technological gambits. People invent snares, nets, and fish weirs, small-scale engineering projects that say, in their own way, we are done relying purely on good luck. Fire management becomes an art form, controlled burns to prod the land into producing desirable. Vegetation is basically the earliest approved landscaping. The relationship with the world grows less adversarial and more sophisticated. Humans learn to coax abundance, or at least make it awkwardly useful. And then there's climate fluctuation, the kind of thing that makes you reevaluate your life choices and your choice of footwear. Warmer periods shrink glaciers, opening new lands. Colder flashes bring hazards that make you wish you'd invested in better thermal socks. These swings create pulses of migration. People move. The continent fills like a series of rooms in a house where every move means reinventing furnishings. When new resources appear, people converge. When hardships arrive, they disperse. That push-pull rhythm is the heartbeat of these early expansions. But let's not make it all noble. There's a running joke that early humans were terrible at boundaries. They discovered a valley, decided it looked promising, and then a neighbor band already had a picnic there. Possessions were fluid. Territories were negotiated through song, threat, display, and occasionally, the extraordinary display of a particularly fine bead. Social structures emerge: leaders, shamans, healers, storytellers. Not because someone read a handbook, but because human groups naturally allocate roles to make decision-making less chaotic. Leadership is pragmatism plus charisma. Shamans get the job because they're good at making weather metaphors and convincing the herd not to stampede. Humor, my beloved survival tool, bounces around these societies like a stubborn echo. People told jokes about the weather. If the sun tries to leave again, tell it we're still paying rent. They made fun of each other's hunting stories, exaggerated, traded insults that doubled as valuable information. Humor kept morale from collapsing into a puddle of existential despair, wafting above a pot of undetermined stew. Sarcasm, even then, worked as emotional insulation. It's likely one of the first cultural exports. As for identity, the real heart of the tale, it wasn't a sudden flash of self-awareness. It was incremental, stitched together with shared stories, common enemies, ice mostly, and traditions of the hearth. We came into being as a social project. Families intermarried, tales spread, languages evolved, and art appeared. Portable art carved into bones and stones like tiny, defiant graffiti claiming, we were here and we had feelings. This is where we should pause, but of course we will not. Because humans kept moving and kept making surprisingly bad decisions and heartbreakingly brilliant ones. The continent was being shaped by feet and choices and the ongoing argument between people who wanted to settle and people who could not stop following migration routes like practical romantics. We are only at the beginning of the recorded leftovers of their lives. Stone points, hearth stains, shadowy footprints in peat. If this is making you wonder what happens next, and you should, leave a comment. What would you name a mammoth if you had to? Also, tell us which route you would have chosen: coast, corridor, or follow the mammoth, and why. Your responses will be judged by an impartial panel of future archaeologists, and me. Stay for the next part, where the continents get more crowded, the tools get sharper, and the survival plans get weirder. The horror continues, but so does the laughter, and that, more than anything, is the real invention of the first Americans. The ability to keep telling the story even while the world tries to shush them with snow. They arrived at dawn like an awkward apology from the sun. Not bright, not punctual, but persistent. If you could have seen them squinting across that frozen plain, you would have thought, these people are committed to being cold, and also, oddly, committed to storytelling. If you're watching right now, type in the comments, What's the worst thing you'd carry across a glacier? Your ex's mixtape or a pet rock? Tell me why. I need material for later. The second chapter opens on an argument that will echo for millennia. Settle or roam. This is not a modern debate about mortgages and avocado toast. This is a primal mud and blood argument about where to put your fire. Some bands fell in love with certain valleys like a stubborn cousin falling in love with a bad idea. This place feels safe until the place stopped feeling safe, usually around the second winter or the first hungry spring. Others couldn't be bothered to commit. They moved in patterns that looked like someone tracing constellations with their boots, purposeful, a little dizzying, and entirely dependent on where the food refused to be shy. Imagine a coastline as the original streaming service, endless choices, unpredictable content, and a premium plan that included mollusks. Coastal migration is the slow, wet, and brilliant subplot of the Ice Age. While some people hunched inland and made friends with the echoes of mammoth herds, others became specialists in shoreline improvisation. They invented waterproof optimism and perfected the art of the quick, cold snack. Fish roasted on stones, kelp chewed like eternal gum, seabird eggs pilfered with the sort of stealth that would make a raccoon blush. These coastal folk used boats or rafts when they could. Not glamorous gondolas, more like we tied logs together and hoped for the best crafts. But if you can make a raft that keeps water out of your lap for 30 minutes, you've invented maritime strategy for your band. Meanwhile, inland innovators were busy turning desperation into design. Spears improved, throwing tactics emerged that were less about a brute force and more about geometry, physics, and the ancient human love for pointy things. They learned to drive herds into natural traps, gullies, cliffs, river bends, and to use coordinated noise and fire to orchestrate mass confusion among the animals. It's both brilliant and slightly unethical if you're an animal. But it worked. The payoffs were enormous. Calories, hides, and a kind of communal confidence that made it easier to invent things like cold weather couture and sarcasm-heavy lullabies. Language, already muttering into being, became a cunning survival tool. It was messy. It was full of gestures, tonal shouts, and a vocabulary that could simultaneously communicate mammoth ahead and don't feed my baby to the mammoth. Over time, subtle grammar rules appeared. By subtle, I mean everyone agreed not to shout during funerals unless the funeral required shouting, which is a policy any society could respect. Oral traditions matured into political systems. Remember, law didn't arrive as a neatly printed pamphlet. It arrived as precedent. We trade meat for stone. And later, we trade meat unless you were the one who ate the sacred berry. And then, we definitely want to hear why you ate the sacred berry, because that's community entertainment. Cultural. Experimentation exploded. Some bands tattooed themselves with soot and tiny bones. Others carved symbols into antler like boutique designers crafting logos for a brand nobody officially recognized. When someone made a particularly stylish spearhead, it became a status symbol. Not because they wanted to impress you on Instagram, that device was not yet available, but because a good spearhead actually meant fewer cold toes at night. Function followed form, and form followed function like a very confused conga line. Rituals multiplied. The shaman, part therapist, part weather analyst, part dramatic narrator, held ceremonies that combined practical knowledge with psychological management. Need someone to interpret a bad omen? That's a job. Need someone to teach your children which berries will not randomly murder them? That's a job too. Shamans built credibility by being a weirdly reliable mix of showman and scientist. They could read animal tracks the way some people read horoscopes, with surprising detail and occasionally dystopian accuracy. When you needed to pick the right path through a frozen plain, you didn't just want muscle. You wanted someone who had memorized the land's mood swings. Trade networks evolved like nervous system branches across the continent. A shiny rock traveled hundreds of miles not because anyone thought it would look good in a living room shelf. Again, living rooms were optional. But because that rock meant better tools, prettier jewelry, and occasionally, better bargaining power. In the event of that annual drama where two bands both claimed the same salmon run, items moved along networks that were as much social as geographic. A bead carved in an Alaskan cove might end up hanging on a belt 10 winters away, carrying with it a story, a scent, and perhaps a rumor about a man who once tripped while carrying a stack of firewood. Art became a sneaky survival mechanism. Carvings on bone, paintings in caves, tiny concentrated rebellions against the cold and the indifferent sky. These images were not just decoration, they were memory banks. A painted bison might be a catalog entry of what to hunt and how to avoid an embarrassing stampede. A carved human figure might be an ancestor, a leader, or a cautionary tale about someone who thought a mammoth could be tamed. These artworks encoded knowledge, jokes, warnings. They were the first FAQs, frequently asked questions about starvation, frostbite, and sneaky neighbors. And the megafauna? They were both blessing and theatrical antagonists. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths. The list reads like a bestiary curated by a dramatist who liked to test human problem-solving skills. Hunting these beasts required planning, teamwork, and a willingness to be cold for diplomatic reasons. Whole rituals grew around the kill, respectful thanks, sharing rules, and sometimes an elaborate grieving process for the animal, which is either noble or incredibly inconvenient if you are trying to roast its liver before sunset. The bones became resources. People built shelters with them, tools, and even art. The animal's death supplied life, and in return, humans tried very hard to be ceremonially nice about it. Population densities crept up. Bands meeting in favorable zones would exchange not just items, but ideas. Sometimes those ideas were brilliant. Other times they were catastrophic, like the invention of a particularly loud celebratory dance that frightened away half the local herd. But over time, sharing knowledge about plant use, tool making, and social strategies accelerated cultural evolution. Who you married mattered. Marriage connected networks, spread innovations, and sometimes diffused grudges. Though grudges have a notorious tendency to persist like winter, agriculture wasn't a sudden plot twist in this era. It was a slow, embarrassing flirtation that would only become serious much later. For now, plant knowledge meant understanding roots, tubers, and wild grains. Some communities practiced proto-farming of sorts, encouraging certain plants to grow near campsites, scattering seeds opportunistically, and basically gardening before gardening had its brand identity. This was adaptive, cautious, and wonderfully unspectacular. No one declared independence from hunting on a Tuesday. They tried a patch of grass, then another, and if the patch survived the winter without staging a mutiny, they kept it. Diseases circulated like low-budget drama series with surprisingly high stakes. New connections meant new pathogens, and these were unforgiving. Illnesses weren't understood in germ theory terms. They were explained in story. Someone angered the weather, someone forgot a ritual. But the practical result was the same. Sickness could collapse a band's ability to hunt, to travel, to cook a decent stew. Communities developed quarantines of a sort, isolating the sick, moving camps, and inventing folk remedies that sometimes worked and sometimes tasted like old roots with bad PR. The perception of disease shaped migration patterns. When a valley got sick, everyone left like a party with poor music and even worse, punch. Music and narrative became glue. Songs encoded migration routes. Tales contained survival tips disguised as entertainment. A child's game could be an exercise in stealth training. A love song could be a manual for cooperative hunting. Why were storytelling and songs so central? Because they stuck in the mind better than a lecture about stone tool maintenance. People learned through repetition. A joke about an ancestor's misadventures with a moose could contain actual GPS instructions. Don't camp north of the Leaning Rock. Humor made learning tolerable in a world that otherwise offered few incentives for optimism. Then came encounters between different cultural groups that were not simply "oh, hello," but "oh, hello" with eyebrows raised. Contact zones where coastal bands met inland bands were hotspots for innovation and embarrassment alike. Think of these places as ancient cultural exchange, fairs where someone might learn a useful net weaving trick, and someone else might accidentally invent the first awkward in-law dispute. Interactions ranged from peaceful trade fairs to violent miscommunications. Sometimes a ritual misstep, like offering the wrong food to a stranger, sparked offense. Other times, the meeting of minds produced a hybrid technology, a coastal fish hook fused with an inland hafting technique, leading to an unexpectedly delightful new spear-hook combo. Climate kept throttling the narrative with dramatic tension. Sudden cooling events forced migrations. Warming pulses opened new corridors. These environmental beats were nature's way of rewriting the script without consulting the cast. A warming phase might restore coastal productivity and invite a renaissance of seafood techniques. A cooling phase might close roots and force communities into cramped coexistence that produced both innovation and conflict. These fluctuations made long-term planning hazardous. Good short-term improvisation became a prized skill. Identity grew more complex. Where once somebody was so-and-so from the riverbend, tribes became long-term brands. People started to identify with mythic ancestors, legendary hunts, and the kind of traditions that make for good Instagram captions if Instagram existed in bone and hide form. Names gained power. Claiming descent from a particular hunter or ancestor was social capital. Stories of origin did double duty. They connected people to the land and to each other, and they supplied a moral code, mostly unspoken rules about how to treat neighbors, how to allocate meat, and how not to be the person who misses next year's. Migration. And art kept whispering secrets. Small portable carvings traveled, and cave paintings, when they existed, were performance pieces for future audiences. Some paintings might be warnings, a red smear indicating a dangerous path. Others were celebrations of abundance. They were concise, dramatic notes written on the landscape. A painted animal had the mnemonic power to remind children which prey to respect, which weapon to use, and which uncle to avoid at family gatherings. As the continent filled, complexity did too. Social roles multiplied. You had leaders who were chosen because they solved immediate problems like how to move the whole camp through a narrow valley without losing Aunt Lyra. You had elders who maintained memory, shamans who translated ecological gibberish into ritual, and specialists who were excellent at making fish traps or carving flutes that sounded like the wind if the wind was in a particularly philosophical mood. Division of labor is less revolutionary here and more survival logic. When someone gets good at making arrows, you let them and you say thank you, and everyone lives slightly longer. By the time seasonal cycles completed their 1000th repetition, for the people living in these landscapes, whole cultural worlds had sprouted. Bands that once grazed the same tundra had evolved different tastes. One group preferred intricate beadwork and ceremonial dances. Another prided itself on the most efficient spearheads and uncompromisingly practical shelters. Differences became identity markers. Marriage alliances spread these traits. Children learned multiple survival songs and multiple ways to cook meat, depending on which parent's tradition wanted to be honored at breakfast. And finally, conflict and cooperation became twin engines of cultural change. Border skirmishes pushed innovation in defense and signaling. Alliances pushed innovation in trade and diplomacy. The continent was a living laboratory of social experiments. Some failed spectacularly. Others evolved into systems that supported larger populations. Through it all, humor persisted. Sarcasm, as ever, was an emotional parka, warm, practical, and always slightly damp with reality. People joked about the weather in a way that made the weather feel less terrifying. They made fun of leaders who wore too many bear claws. They teased shamans about dramatic pronouncements that turned out to be wrong, then bought them a fish anyway, because social cohesion matters. If you've stuck with me this far, tell me in the comments, would you rather be a coastal forager with a suspiciously elegant raft, or an inland hunter with a spear so sharp it has standards? Choose your band and defend your choice. I will judge you silently and possibly give you reasons that make sense only to archaeologists. The second chapter ends not with a period, but with a question. What happens when the land gets crowded enough that invention is no longer about survival, but about making life slightly less miserable and marginally more joyous? Come back for part 3 to watch small technologies explode into cultural revolutions, to witness the birth of regional styles that will bicker across centuries, and to see the day someone invents a technique so clever it changes everything, or at least changes dinner plans forever. The horror continues, but so does the laughter. And that is the true legacy of these first Americans, an insistence on telling jokes while shivering, and on teaching their kids the right way to tie a knot that will one day become a tradition. Imagine your blanket as a dead mammoth's hide, your alarm as a glacier's sigh, and for breakfast you choose between a slightly remorseful fish or a root that might hate you back. Welcome to the next act of the continent's long, cold stand-up. Routine. They called it progress, because the words, "we have fewer immediate existential emergencies," sound better than "we ate better," and then argued about bead placement. If part 2 was the awkward adolescent phase when bands decided whether they were going to settle or ghost each other across valleys. Part 3 is when the continent started to get opinions about style, law, and social embarrassment. Human groups stopped being ephemeral clusters and began to look like communities with subscription plans. You could get basic survival, or for a few extra hides a year, premium membership with ceremonial dances and less theft. Meet Cora, a woman who had perfected the art of carrying practicality like an accessory. Cora's spear was a statement, not flashy, but it had a dignity to it. The kind of dignity that makes wolves reconsider career choices. She'd seen settlements try to last an entire winter on bad stew, and worse arguments about who left the drying racks in the rain. Cora's strategy was simple: diversify your skills, hoard friends like they're useful fungi, and never trust a river whose mood smells like betrayal. She taught younger hunters the difference between being brave and being stupid. The difference, essentially, between a tactical retreat and a dramatic funeral. Communities began to stratify, not into rigid classes at first, but into roles you'd recognize at a particularly rustic Renaissance fair. Leaders who could make quick, unpopular decisions without melodrama. Elders who conserved memory like a squirrel. Hordes nonsense. Healers who mixed plant knowledge with performance art. Tool makers who could make a blade that split hairs and egos. Division of labor became a thing because it allowed people to get really good at one miserable task and then impress the rest with it. Specialization meant efficiency. It also meant gossip. If you were the best at making bone needles, you were rich in social currency and probably expected to help stitch the wig for the annual Ancestor Festival. The Ancestor Festival, a potentially messy but deeply effective propaganda tool, formalized many social obligations. People gathered meat, crafted offerings, and recited origin tales that increasingly sounded like PR campaigns for certain lineages. "We are descendants of the great mammoth whisperer," someone would declare, and half the crowd would nod because the narrative made hunting quotas more tolerable. These rituals did more than honor the dead. They cemented alliances and smoothed over the kind of resentments that, left unchecked, devolved into creative and unhelpful revenge theater. Ancestors were invoked like a jury. Would Reginald the Mammoth approve? If the answer was yes, community cohesion improved by an approximate but appreciable amount. Material culture exploded. Toolkits diversified until they looked like boutique toolkits for people who had discovered pride and practical needs simultaneously. At some camps, kids apprenticed at weaving. At others, youngsters learned the precise art of chipping obsidian so that it yielded blades sharp enough to give you a philosophical point. Innovation spread because trade networks, those social nervous systems, moved faster than glaciers. People exchanged not just goods, but techniques. A cutting method here, a hide processing trick there, a new song that described escape routes in the cadence of a dance. Innovations didn't appear as sudden epiphanies, but as the slow accretion of improvements, mistakes, and happy accidents. Then came the little technologies that changed dinners forever. Fish weirs started appearing in tidal zones and rivers like miniature bureaucracies for fish. These weirs were clever. You coax fish into channels using low stone walls and stakes so that catch effort dropped and caloric return skyrocketed. Someone noticed that drying fish on racks made them last longer and less smelly. Another person rolled their eyes and declared that smoked fish were fashionable. Suddenly, more protein was available with less homicidal risk, and populations nudged upward like yeast in bread. Not dramatic in the next week sense, but dramatic in the 10 to 50 year sense, which is basically the history version of an overnight sensation. Population increase created pressure. Space became a resource you had to negotiate, not merely discover. Camps that had once seemed infinite because the world was broader now had neighbors with opinions. Territory became a conversation. Who uses the salmon run this year? Who was allowed to harvest the berry patch near the leaning stone? Conflict flared, sometimes resolved in ritualized display, sometimes resolved with blunt objects, and every skirmish rewrote social maps. These tensions catalyzed political thought. People invented mechanisms for dispute resolution. Councils convened, elders mediated, and younger people practiced rhetorical maneuvers that, if recorded, would have made for a fascinating lost genre of Ice Age Senate comedy. Gender roles were likewise adaptive rather than prescriptive. While modern readers often assume rigid structures, the reality was pragmatic and messy. When the needs of a camp demanded different labor distributions, roles shifted. Women could be primary hunters, men could tend roots, both could be shamans. Both could argue vigorously about who had the better joke. Flexibility was key. The communities that thrived were often those that refused to be stranded by ideology, and instead read the environment like a manual. Art continued to proliferate, and this time it became more intentional and portable. Small carvings of animals, stylized faces, or geometric patterns were made to travel. These objects were talismans, mnemonic devices, and items of personal pride. Imagine a finely carved pendant of walrus tusk, worn by someone who'd crossed multiple seasonal rounds. It wasn't just jewelry. It was credentials, a tiny resume that said, "I've been to places and done things, and I have the pendant to prove it." Tactile art encoded memory and instruction. A carved motif might indicate a hunting method, a sacred site, or where to find a route that won't make you hallucinate about sheep wearing hats. Belief systems bifurcated too. Some groups leaned into animism with fervid enthusiasm. Every rock had a personality and a particularly scathing opinion about human boot etiquette, while others developed ancestor cults with quasi-legal obligations attached. Shamans became both spiritual and ecological managers. If a certain ritual halted raids by bears or improved salmon returns, it acquired an almost scientific legitimacy. The line between ritual and ecology blurred because ritual was often the most reliable way people had to coordinate behavior across large groups. If you want everyone to avoid a treacherous pass, making its danger a sacred taboo is more effective than posting a sign in a language 20 communities away. Trade networks matured into routes with reputations. Some trails were famed for the best flint, others for a particular kind of strangely addictive berry. Some coasts were whispered about because the tidal pools were generous and the clams were surprisingly philosophical. Traders, people whose craft was mobility and conversation, became cultural vectors. They carried ideas as readily as goods, songs, marriage proposals, legal precedents, and the occasional juicy tidbit of gossip that would change the marriage prospects in a valley. A trader's arrival at camp was a social event. Someone came with news and new bead patterns and possibly a dramatic story about a river that ate a canoe. Culinary habits evolved in surprising ways. With more reliable protein sources and innovations like drying and smoking, the average Ice Age cook could shift from desperate improvisation to nuanced preference. People developed taste cultures. In some regions, slow-smoked fish became a delicacy. In others, a broth made from marrow and certain herbs took on sacred connotations. The food you brought to a communal feast was a statement. Did you bring abundance or did you bring apologies? Presentation mattered because social capital did. A beautifully arranged platter could secure alliances, a bowl of lumpy stew could end them. Mortuary practices grew more elaborate, signaling both reverence and a burgeoning interest in leaving things better labeled for future archaeologists. Burial mounds, shard-littered grave goods, and ceremonial cairns marked territories and relations. Graves taught the living about lineage, territorial claims, and culinary preferences of the dead. They also prompted the occasional scandal when someone pilfered a grave, an act universally frowned upon and sometimes punished with exclusion or a particularly uncomfortable public ceremony. The expansion of ritual and law helped create a sense of history. Where once memory lived purely in reactions to weather and animal migrations, communities began to curate narratives. Myth-making became more structured. Legends acquired sequels. A founding myth of a community might be expanded upon over generations until it resembled a saga with sequels, prequels, and obscure spin-offs only a specialist would appreciate. Claiming descent from a mythical founder was now actual political leverage. If your clan traced itself to a legendary hunter who allegedly negotiated a truce with a thunderstorm, you had bargaining power. Politics, like fashion, borrowed heavily from spectacle. Interactions between inland and coastal groups intensified in unexpected ways. The coastal people's fish technologies, nets, hooks, drying racks, were adopted inland wherever rivers allowed, and inland hide processing techniques improved coastal clothing. Hybrid technologies emerged. A coastal band borrowed a hafting method and invented a composite spear that was both seaworthy and good for arguing with giant fish. These cultural crossovers sometimes resulted in elegant innovation and sometimes in social faux pas, like gifting dried kelp to an inland elder who considered it a condiment too avant-garde. Disease, that merciless plot twist, continued to shape demography. More connectivity meant more opportunities for pathogens to hop between groups. People developed ritual responses, quarantines, isolation of the sick, and elaborate purification rites that were as much about preventing spread as they were about maintaining social order. In some instances, a community's survival hinged on a shaman's quick thinking and a healthy dose of practical sanitation, like moving camps when a valley got too full of coughs. The biological realities of life forced cultural adaptations. Those adaptations sometimes became rituals that outlived their original purpose, like an archaic hand wash that had become a dramatic pre-feast gesture. Language blossomed into dialects and sometimes into languages that were impressively distinct. Words for basic concepts multiplied into regional varieties. The vocabulary for hunting techniques was dense and nuanced in hunter-centric communities, while coastal dialects had a lexicon for tidal moods and types of kelp. Oral fluency became a form of capital, and multilingual individuals were invaluable traders, negotiators, and gossip dwarfs. Linguistic exchange also encoded laws and myths. Recounting an origin tale in the original dialect carried authority. Retelling it in a neighboring tongue required careful translation, lest someone accidentally declare a treaty null and void. Conflict management matured. Ritualized combat, symbolic challenges, and negotiated exchanges replaced many of the more destructive clashes. When two bands argued over a fish weir, they might resolve it with a labor-sharing rule, or by creating a neutral festival where both groups contributed resources. These arrangements were fragile and required constant social maintenance, but they often worked better than constant raiding. Peacemaking could be an entire career path. Specialists in diplomacy traveled, brokered marriages, and advised on etiquette, a function that made them indispensable and sometimes mercilessly mocked in songs. And amid these social shifts, humor remained the soft, warm core people went to when the world felt too big. Jokes evolved into complex narrative forms, mock epics that recounted ridiculous hunts, satirical laments about relatives who hoarded beads, and sarcastic anthems about the weather. Humor itself became a tool of social cohesion. Teasing someone who had made a foolish decision signaled a demand for better behavior. Laughing together after a close call reaffirmed loyalty. Humor was both lubricant and salve. By the end of this phase, the continent hummed with a new density of culture. Networks of specialists, more entrenched rituals, hybrid technologies, and a deeper sense of collective memory. People were no longer merely reacting to the environment. They had begun to read, shape, and narrate it. They composed laws, crafted art that traveled, and told stories that stitched generations together like careful seams. If you're watching this and thinking, okay, enough drama, what would I be? Write in the comments, would you be the diplomat who fixes peace with a particularly persuasive bead, the shaman who charms fish out of rivers, or the grumpy artisan who makes the best needles and refuses to laugh at bad jokes? Defend your choice with a single sentence. I will judge your taste and possibly promote you to honorary band member. Stay for part 4. We're about to watch local experiments grow into regional powers, see the first true long-distance alliances, and witness technologies mature into social revolutions. Also, someone will invent a ridiculous but very useful thing that makes life marginally better and exponentially more complicated emotionally. The continent's madness continues, and if history has taught us anything, it's that the people who survived were those who could laugh, adapt, and occasionally throw a perfectly timed festival. Imagine a community meeting where someone proposes, let's domesticate a plant, and another replies, bold, but also, do we have time for heartbreak? Welcome to the season where small ideas become inconveniently large empires of habit. By part 4, the continent has stopped being a mere backdrop and has started to prefer a leading role. Local experiments, little engineering feats, weirdly specific rituals, and a habit of arguing with the weather have accreted into regional tendencies. The groups who once passed each other like ships in a fog now exchange marriage partners, songs, laws, and sometimes the occasional insult that becomes tradition. Networks that began as pragmatic trade routes blossom into alliances that look suspiciously like early geopolitics. Not yet empires, but not delighted by chaos either. The first true long-distance alliances are born of clarity and necessity. If my river floods and your valley shares salt, we will share grain and gossip, and no one will burn the other's drying racks. People formalize reciprocal obligations. These are not treaties on parchment, that would be absurd and also heavy. These are promises built into rituals and repeated in yearly festivals, where leaders publicly exchange gifts and vows while the crowd judges their sincerity with an expert eye. Ceremonies become legal contracts made dramatic, because drama is enforceable in a pre-literate political economy. If you fail to uphold your vow, the storytellers will not let you forget it. Reputation becomes currency, and with reputation comes a brand of soft power. Some groups become renowned for their flint work, others for their fermented fish that taste suspiciously of triumph, and some for their magnificent complaint songs that can shame a rival into better behavior. These reputations incentivize others to maintain relationships across long distances. People who live near the best flint quarries could not hoard that advantage forever. Their wares and techniques flowed outward, sometimes traded for non-material things like prestige or symbolic marriages. A good in-law connection meant access to new hunting grounds and a bolstering of influence. Networks of kinship and trade make regional stability possible, until they don't, and then they make for very juicy origin myths. Technology, by now, is no longer a collection of ad hoc hacks. It's an industry of specialists and sudden trends. We see the maturation of composite tools, spears with shafts reinforced by bone and tied with fiber, so cunning you'd call it engineering if you had a chalkboard and a comfortable chair. Somebody invents a drilling technique to hollow bone for pipes. Another community perfects a tanning method that turns hide into weatherproof cloak with less cursing. These technologies spread. A hunter from far away returns with a superior harpoon, and suddenly half the coast questions their previous life choices. The cultural equivalent of a product launch happens when a new method reduces the risk of starvation by, say, 40%, and everyone adopts it because mortality is persuasive advertising. This is also the period where storage scales up. Small caches of dried meat evolve into communal granaries, cleverly disguised as stone mounds and rituals. The ability to store surplus changes everything. It alters migration rhythms, allows for population booms, and enables specialists to exist for longer without producing immediate calories. People who make pottery begin to understand sealed storage. Those who master smoke curing become local heroes. Surplus supports artisans, musicians, and people who write laws in their heads and recite them memorably at council meetings. The social landscape becomes more complex in response. With bigger communities and more visible wealth, social stratification begins to crystallize in non-rigid but noticeable forms. Some lineages gain status through repeated success in leadership, prosperous marriages, or control of valuable production techniques. With status comes obligations. Patrons must host feasts, defend allies, and sponsor festivals. Failure to do so can topple reputations faster than you can dry a fish. Still, mobility remains. Talent can flow between groups, craftspeople can relocate, and marital ties often smooth over the sting of inequality. The best leaders are those who balance generosity with competence. The worst are the ones who invest in too many ceremonial beads and forget to feed the people. Politics grows theatrical. We see the rise of councils and assemblies that deliberate in public squares, near fires that refuse to be polite. Orators hone a talent for concise, performative persuasion. Some communities institutionalize elders' councils with decision-making rules, quorums measured by the number of spears leaning together, votes counted by bead exchanges. Ritualized diplomacy is a refined craft. Gift-giving is calibrated to signal sincerity without collapsing into debt that the giver cannot honor. Diplomats practice facial expressions that say, "I respect you," without implying surrender. It's awkward and human and spectacularly effective. Religion and cosmology keep evolving in ways that do double duty as social glue. New origin stories are minted that justify social order and resource allocation. Some cults emphasize ancestors as lawgivers. Others cults emphasize landscape spirits who prefer tidy offerings. Shamans acquire reputational capital, not merely for divination, but because their ecological knowledge helps manage resources. A shaman who can predict seasonal fish abundance or identify dangerous berry patches is invaluable. Ritual calendars align labor with seasons. Hunting festivals timed to game migrations. Planting rites to coax abundant tuber growth. And mourning rituals timed to minimize competition during lean months. The sacred and the practical become indistinguishable because survival requires rituals that actually work. Interregional competition intensifies, but so does creativity. Skirmishes and raiding are common, but they are often constrained by the logic of reciprocity. You don't burn a neighbor who might save you in a famine next year. Instead, conflicts are sometimes resolved by displays of technological superiority, who can build the better trap, or by symbolic contests where a community proves its claim through a feat of endurance or skill. War exists, but it is rarely total. Resources are valuable, and permanent destruction is inefficient. Much of the competition plays out as one-upmanship in ritualized contexts, a festival where each group showcases its best things, spears, songs, cooked fish, and where losers accept spoilers in the form of teasing and then maybe improve their technique. This era also sees the acceleration of gender and age roles into more formalized institutions. Youth training systems, apprenticeships, ritualized coming-of-age hunts, skill-based mentorships appear across regions. Children learn a complex curriculum, how to read animal tracks like weather, how to negotiate marriage alliances, and how to perform the compression of stories into mnemonic songs. Elders become institutional memory banks. They keep genealogies, migration maps encoded in song, and legal precedents and anecdotes. This stored wisdom makes large-scale coordination possible. If someone in a distant valley wants to reopen an ancient salt route, they consult an elder who remembers the song that encodes the safe fords. In an oral culture, elders are both libraries and performance centers. Cognitively, the continent is now a dense web of shared knowledge. Mental maps become highly detailed. People can recount routes spanning hundreds of miles, not as cold coordinates, but as stories. After the leaning stone that looks like a sleeping dog, past the 3 aspens, then the river that sings like a woman who lost her spoon. Oral geography is astonishingly accurate. The cognitive load of this knowledge creates social specialization. Some people become master navigators, others excel at seasonal prediction. A few weave myths that serve as legal codes. These roles are crucial because they allow communities to navigate a world of increasing unpredictability. Agriculture, still not a full takeover, but now an earnest partner, begins to stabilize some communities. Where it takes hold, it does so in a mosaic fashion. Gardens alongside hunting grounds, managed stands of plants near camps, and transplanting of useful tubers. Domestication is incremental. A plant tolerant of trampling gets favored, seeds get collected and scattered near camps, and slowly the genetics of useful plants change. These proto-domestication projects are accompanied by experimentation in storage and crop processing technology, which in turn feed population growth and the rise of more complex institutions. Farming is not a magic switch. It's a slow, awkward negotiation between humans and plants with a lot of trial and error and occasional culinary triumphs. Maritime innovation skyrockets in coastal zones. Improved watercraft, planked vessels in some regions, sophisticated lashings and sealskin coverings in others enable longer voyages and more dependable trade. Maritime specialists emerge, navigators who read currents like text, carpenters who shape ribs and keels, and divers who harvest shellfish with techniques refined across generations. Seafaring spreads culture and genes, and coastal nodes become hubs of exchange, pulsing with visitors who return inland with innovations and rumors. Some coastal settlements achieve levels of density that would look like towns to an outsider. Sustained occupation, specialized crafts, and ceremony calendars that sync with tidal cycles. By now, artistic expression matures into social signaling at scale. Monumental art, stone circles, painted communal spaces, arranged bone art, serves as territorial markers and as social markers of identity. Rock art becomes more complex, sometimes incorporating sequences that track calendar events or commemorative victories. Portable art becomes a currency of status and a vector for aesthetic exchange. Artists are also technicians. The person who sculpts bone ornaments often knows which hammer to use and where to source the best material, making artistry a technological and social role. All of these developments coalesce into the first true proto-states, regional centers of power that are not sovereign in a modern sense but exercise sustained influence, militarily, economically, and ritually, over surrounding territories. These centers coordinate large projects, building fish traps that require many hands, organizing multi-band hunts, or convening pan-regional festivals. Political power is still diffuse. Alliances are often temporary and contingent, yet the capability to mobilize 100 people for a season-long project marks a significant shift. Labor organization becomes sophisticated, quotas, feasts to motivate work, and ritual obligations to secure compliance. Coercion exists, but so do incentives, and the most successful leaders are those who balance both. And through it all, the human capacity for absurdity grows more refined. Bureaucracy emerges in charming forms, lists of obligations recited in song, quotas enforced by jesters turned auditors, and lavish feasts that are basically PR campaigns in edible form. People invent etiquette for every situation: how to greet a group from the north, the proper way to accept a trade bead, the permissible number of exclamations when a mammoth is sighted. These rituals are functional, they limit conflict and enable cooperation, yet they also create room for satire, parodies, and the kinds of jokes that future archaeologists will call cultural nuance. The horror of survival never fully leaves. Droughts, epidemics, failed harvests, and cascading migrations all happen. Catastrophes test social contracts and sometimes break them. When the river floods or a pathogen ravages a valley, the social and technical infrastructure determines whether a community adapts or collapses. The more complex and interconnected the society, the higher the stakes, but also the better the tools for coordinated response. Rituals that once seemed merely ceremonial transform into emergency protocols. The songs that children learned for fun become vital maps for relocation during crises. This is the bitter, beautiful trade-off of complexity. And so, at the end of this long sweep, what are the first Americans? They are not a single monolithic people arriving with a plan. They are millions of improvisations sewn into patterns, 1,000 practical jokes on the climate, and an uncountable number of nights where someone chose to sing instead of to give up. They are innovators and bureaucrats, shamans and fishermen, storytellers and diplomats, people who domesticated plants with the patience of saints and who convinced their neighbors to adopt the appropriate number of ceremonial beads. They are the architects of everything that followed: the languages, the alliances, the festivals, the feuds. Now I'll ask you to do something dangerous. Pick a legacy. In the comments, choose which thread of this story you'd carry forward into the modern world. Would you pick the maritime innovators who turned tides into trade, the ritual makers who turned promises into political tools, or the storytellers who preserved maps in song? Defend your choice in one sentence, and if you dare, invent a festival you'd celebrate in their honor. I will judge your invention on aesthetic merit and survivability in a cold climate. This is the end of the tale we promised in 4 parts, but of course it's also a beginning. The people who stitched together survival, absurdity, and song left the continent a different place than they found it. More crowded, more inventive, more complicated, and slightly smellier in a tellingly cultural way. Their legacy is everywhere, buried in middens, encoded in myths, and alive in the stubborn human habit of laughing in the face of disaster. If history feels like a horror show with an excellent soundtrack, that's because for many of our ancestors it literally was. They survived by making rules, by inventing festivals, by building rafts and harpoons and packs, and by never, ever underestimating the persuasive power of a well-timed joke. If you enjoyed this macabre little tour, like, share, and seriously, comment. Tell us which ancestor you'd want at your metaphorical dinner party and why. Pick someone dramatic: the great mammoth whisperer, the shaman who could name storms, or the artisan who invented the world's first mildly ironic bead. Name them, roast them lovingly, and give them a modern job title. I promise to read every single one and to award imaginary prizes: the golden spear for bravery, the beaded sash for diplomacy, and the eternal lintel for anyone who can make survival with sarcasm into a career path.